Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Parallel Deku. Back with another fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Was Saved by Unexpected Allies. Now before starting, please give this video a like. And subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Just a few more minutes left of class, he thought. He should start packing so he would not be late. If he was late, he did not want to think about the consequences. It was always hard for him to take his mind off certain things. People often called him thoughtful. Once he delved into a thought, it stuck, so he used techniques he had learned over the years to calm himself. He breathed slowly in through his nose and released the breath, repeating until his pulse slowed. He counted up to 10 and back down until his chest felt less tight. The bell rang. Panic flared. He hurried to pack his supplies, telling himself not to be late. The classroom had emptied. Only Shiro, Ojiro, Azui, and Bakugo remained. As he reached to stand, a hand slammed onto his desk. Bakugo exploded with insults, demanding to know why he was still in the classroom and calling him a shitty nerd. Izuku apologized and said he had been about to leave. When he tried to go, Bakugo grabbed his arm and accused him of ignoring him, saying he did not belong at the school and ridiculing how he had gotten in. Izuku froze, unsure how to reply while held by a tight grip. Bakugo shoved him back against the wall. Sparks of explosions flickered from Bakugo's palms. The rage in his eyes made Izuku gulp. Bakugo shouted and then struck him across the face. Bakugo demanded to know why someone he considered quirkless existed and suggested he should do something drastic. He balled his fist and threatened that Izuku would regret ignoring him. Izuku shut his eyes and braced for pain. Kirishima's voice called out, asking Bakugo if he was joining them for lunch and noticing Izuku. Kaminari stood behind him. Kirishima's arrival broke the tension. Bakugo said he had been just playing and released his grip, joining his friends and leaving the classroom. Izuku stood for a moment to catch his breath, then headed out. Lunch was already halfway over. In the cafeteria, he sat beside Uraraka at a table with Ida and Todoroki. Uraraka gave him a worried look and asked where he had been. He told her he had been to the nurse for a headache. She said she hoped he felt better and returned to the conversation. Izuku stared at his tray. He had no appetite. He rubbed his sore cheek where Bakugo had struck him and excused himself, saying he needed the bathroom. In the mirror, his cheek was definitely red. He splashed cold water on his face, dried it with a paper towel, and looked at his reflection. He saw someone he felt was pathetic and quirkless, a disappointment. That thought hardened into a decision. He ran through the school until he found a narrow staircase leading upward. Tears blurred his vision as he climbed. At the top, the door stuck at first, but he forced it open and kept moving without thinking. He stopped on the ledge of a building and tried to process where things had gone wrong. He thought about his mother, how she had always been there to comfort him and do what she could to make him happy. He told her he loved her, and then he jumped. The fall did not go as he had expected. He hit a hard surface with a shock but not the crushing pain he had anticipated. He lifted his eyes and saw several pairs of feet around him. Hands reached for him and helped him sit up. Voices expressed concern, asking if he was okay, saying they had been so worried, and offering to make sure he could stand. 2 people helped him to his feet. He hissed at the pain when an arm touched his side to steady him. One of them asked if it hurt. A girl with blonde hair and buns, Toga Himiko, hurried over and apologized, saying Izuku must have hurt his side when he fell. He reassured her that he was fine and that he already had an injury there. A pale girl with dark hair and very fair skin, Yuzora Moriya, asked if she could take a look. Izuku nodded, and Yuzora lifted the side of his shirt. When she saw the large bruise, her expression grew more worried. Yuzora asked how he had gotten it. Izuku said he had fallen, though he knew the bruise had come from a punch 2 days earlier from Kaken. He felt bad for lying, but he was not ready to share the real reason with people he had just met. He realized he did not even know their names yet and asked who they were. Standing in front of him, besides Toga and Yuzora, were a young man with stitched skin and dark hair and another who seemed surrounded by a faint purple mist. Toga introduced herself with a bright smile and seemed excited. Yuzora introduced herself next. She had a scattering of freckles, violet eyes, and wavy dark hair with blue and purple highlights that shimmered slightly, giving her an otherworldly, twilight-like beauty. Izuku noted this quietly to himself, not as a crush but as an observation. The stitched man introduced himself as Dabi, and Izuku noticed his vibrant turquoise eyes. The mist-encircled young man introduced himself as Kurojairi. Dabi asked Izuku his name, and Izuku replied that he was Izuku Midoriya. He suddenly noticed they were standing on a rooftop and wondered how he had gotten back up there. Kurojairi explained that while the group had been coming out of an alley on the side of the school, Dabi had seen Izuku on the ledge. When Dabi noticed he was crying, Kurojairi used his warp gate quirk to send portals so Izuku would land back on the roof before reaching the ground. Izuku thanked them, stammering his gratitude. Dabi said anyone would try to help in that situation. When Izuku asked what they had been doing in the alley, they avoided the question at first. Toga suggested they go down and get to know each other, and Izuku hesitated because he still had school, but acknowledged that he did owe them after they helped him. Izuku followed the others as they left the building. They did not have to be particularly stealthy since class was in session. Once they left the school, they went to a small, tucked-away cafe with few customers. They ordered drinks and sat together at a table. Toga gave Izuku a nickname, and he blushed at being called by it. When she asked if he had any hobbies, Izuku admitted he did not have much free time because he spent most of his time after school treating the wounds Kaken gave him. Yuzora said she hoped he would find time to hang out with them. Dabi handed Izuku his phone and asked him to put his number in. Izuku added his contact and sent a quick message to make sure it had been entered correctly. Dabi said he would make a group chat for them all. Izuku asked about their quirks. Toga explained that her quirk allowed her to transform into someone else after obtaining a biological sample. She could mimic another person's appearance. Dabi described his quirk as the generation and manipulation of blue flames. Kurojairi's ability was the creation of portals, which he had already used to save Izuku. Yuzora explained that her quirk was vampire-like. She could transform into a bat and fly, had enhanced senses like seeing in the dark and hearing faint sounds, and possessed increased strength and speed. She also said she was unusually long-lived and that, under certain circumstances, she could exert control over someone for a limited time after making close physical contact with them. To demonstrate, Yuzora allowed a subtle change to her teeth to become more pronounced, showing a hint of fangs. Izuku told them they all sounded powerful and asked if any of them were interested in becoming heroes. Yuzora answered that they were not. Kurojairi began to explain that this might come as a shock, and Toga added that they apologized for not telling him sooner, because they had not wanted to scare him away and lose the chance to help him. Dabi sighed and confirmed what they had been hinting at: they were villains. Izuku stood in stunned silence for a moment and then let out a nervous laugh, asking if it was a joke. The group apologized again, explaining that they were sorry they hadn't told him earlier. Yuzora and the others assured Izuku that, despite being villains, they genuinely wanted to be friends with him. They asked him to understand, emphasizing that their desire to befriend him was sincere. Yuzora told him that everything they did had a reason and that they only acted according to what they believed was right. She added that their methods were not always perfect, but they tried to put their convictions into action. They wanted to bring justice to the world like heroes, but they went about it differently and had been labeled villains because they saw things more clearly than heroes. She finished and looked at him, waiting for a reply. Izuku stammered that they wanted to be his friends. Toga assured him that of course they wanted to be his friends. Izuku explained that he had never really had real friends before. He remembered one childhood friend, but after that friend got his quirk and Izuku did not, the friend began to bully him. He recalled how he had stood by that friend at first, only to be belittled and hurt over time. When he intervened on behalf of someone being bullied, the friend had beaten him up. The recent bruise on his body had come from a punch just 2 days ago, and the friend had repeatedly told him to kill himself. After being told to jump off a roof, Izuku had acted on that instruction, and the villains had saved him. He thanked them for rescuing him. Toga asked if that had really been because of that friend. Yuzora suggested that he tell them about the friend, saying that he did not have to if it made him uncomfortable but that it often helped to talk. Izuku began from the beginning. He named his friend as Katsuki Bakugo, known to him as Kaken, and said they had done everything together. He had admired Bakugo, especially after Bakugo manifested a flashy explosion quirk. Bakugo had told him that the characters in Izuku could be read as Deku, which meant useless, and he used that to insult Izuku because Izuku did not have a quirk at the time. Bakugo praised himself loudly and could not tolerate the idea of someone being better than him or needing help. Izuku remembered jumping into water to save Bakugo when he fell off a bridge and how furious Bakugo had been. He remembered standing up to Bakugo when he bullied someone else and being beaten for it. The pattern of abuse had lasted for years. After Bakugo told him to take a swan dive off the roof, Izuku had jumped, which led to the villains saving him that day. He thanked them again for intervening. Dabi told him that he had been through a lot and that if he ever needed help, he should text them and they would come running. Toga noticed that Izuku was tearing up and asked what was wrong. Izuku admitted that he was not used to having so many people to talk to and so many people who cared about him. All four villains stood and hugged him. He felt profoundly grateful to have these new friends and to experience happiness for the first time in a long while. They asked what time school ended. Izuku answered that school let out at 3 o'clock. When they realized it was already 25 past 3, they worried whether his mother would be concerned. Izuku decided he should get home before she started to worry, and the villains offered to walk him. They got up, threw away their empty drinks, and headed out the door together. On the walk, Dabi asked how Izuku had gotten into UA without a quirk. Izuku explained that he had sort of gotten a quirk right before the entrance exams. He admitted that the origin of the quirk was something he could not reveal. Dabi commented that Izuku had been lucky to obtain it in time for the exams, but Izuku replied that it was not much help. Every time he used the quirk, it injured him badly. He had already broken one arm several times. The others said they could help him, offering to train him to control it. Toga promised they would help and joked that maybe one day he would be more powerful than Bakugo, mispronouncing Bakugo's name in a teasing way that made them all laugh. They reached Izuku's house and shared a brief, reluctant goodbye. Dabi reminded him to text if he needed anything. Izuku smiled, waved a final farewell, and went inside. His mother called to ask if he had arrived and mentioned that dinner would take a while and he might want a snack. Izuku ran to his room, changed into comfortable clothes, collapsed onto his bed, and sighed. He lay there thinking that maybe this could be the start of happiness now that he had friends. The thought was fragile, and he could not help feeling uncertain. The next morning Izuku's mother woke him, warning that he would be late. He groaned and checked his alarm clock. It was 7:30, and he had only about 20 minutes before he needed to be at school. He jumped out of bed and hurried to the bathroom. While brushing his teeth, he wondered why his alarm had not woken him, then realized he had turned it off because his nightmares usually woke him first. He noticed, with a mix of surprise and relief, that he had not had any nightmares the previous night and understood why memories of the day before, of finding friends who cared, were still vivid. He reflected on the contradiction. They were villains and villains could lie, but something in him said they were sincere and would be there for him. He finished getting dressed in his uniform and saw that he was not actually very late. His mother reminded him that he would be moving into the dorm today, and he wondered whether he would have roommates. Izuku thought he would have to wait until school to find out. After breakfast he headed out, wondering why he had been trying to get to school so early every day. Dabi and Toga were in a narrow alley, keeping to the shadows. Shigaraki had sent Toga to collect a sample for their next mission, and he had been tasked with making sure she did not do anything reckless. When she finished, they quickly tidied the area to avoid leaving any trace of what they had done. As they were about to leave, Dabi heard someone shout from farther down the alley and nudged Toga. A blonde man pushed a smaller boy against the wall with a harsh shove. The blonde glared at him, asking what would happen if the boy got in his way. The smaller boy stammered that he had been late for school. The blonde snapped at him more harshly and struck him across the face. Dabi recognized the pair instantly. The blonde was Bakugo, and the stunned boy with fluffy green hair and bright emerald eyes was Izuku. Dabi signaled to Toga without speaking, and she gave a small nod. He moved closer, careful not to make a sound, and Izuku looked up with a pleading expression that needed no words. Bakugo raised his fist again, but Dabi intercepted it, gripping his wrist firmly. Bakugo reacted in surprise, tried to wrench free, and then, seeing a dangerous expression from behind Dabi, decided to let the moment pass. Toga stood close enough to be an unspoken threat. Dabi told Bakugo to leave the kid alone. Bakugo answered that he was not afraid and that he wanted to get to class before being late, but he warned Izuku that he would make things difficult after school. With that he walked off. Izuku looked shaken, so Dabi pulled him into a reassuring hug. Izuku hesitated, then hugged back, and Toga slipped into the embrace as well. They all stepped back after a moment, and Izuku asked about the nickname. Dabi called him his little bunny in a teasing, gentle way, and Toga echoed it. They shared another brief hug before Izuku hurried off towards school, grateful and embarrassed. Dabi watched him go and thought this strange friendship might be interesting. He imagined getting to tease Bakugo one day, then turned and left with Toga. Izuku ran to school with a whirlwind of thoughts. He could not believe Dabi and Toga had saved him again. It felt strange and comforting that villains could make him feel safe. He tried not to feel guilty. Without them he might not have made it. He replayed Dabi calling him Little Bunny, and found himself blushing at the memory. When he arrived late, Mr. Aizawa was accepting excuses. Izuku apologized for being late and explained he had been lost on the way to school. Mr. Aizawa said he would usually be stricter, but luck was on Izuku's side. The students were being assigned dorms today, and there would be free time once the dormitory system was explained. Aizawa led the students into the dormitory building and outlined the rules and amenities. He described a courtyard, a common area with bath and laundry separated by gender, and roomy individual rooms equipped with air conditioning, toilets, fridges, and closets. His explanation drew excited reactions. One student, Uraraka, fainted from the excitement over how spacious it all seemed. Everyone moved into their rooms. Izuku set up a few All Might figures on his desk, put up some posters, and placed his favorite All Might plush on his bed. While he sat on the bed, his phone buzzed with a message from Dabi asking if he had gotten to school okay. Izuku felt a warm blush at being checked up on and replied that he had. Dabi said he would go before getting Izuku in trouble for texting during class hours. Izuku answered that because of the dorm move they had free time for the rest of the day. A knock sounded at the door, and someone announced that there would be a dorm room contest. I was about to accept an invitation when my phone buzzed with a new text. Dabi texted to ask if I had any plans for the day and said that he, Toga, and Yuzora would love to see me again. I felt a flutter of excitement and nervousness that I couldn't quite explain. A knock came at the door, and someone called my name. I stammered that I already had plans. The caller said it was fine and to have fun. I replied that I was free and would love to hang out. Dabi then asked what dorm room I was in, so I sent my room number. A few minutes passed without another message. I hesitated about texting again, not wanting to seem desperate, when a soft thud at my window made me look over. Yuzora landed on my windowsill like a bat. I unlocked the window for him. Yuzora said he was just checking to make sure this was the right room and that he would notify Dabi and Toga to come over. I agreed, and a portal appeared in the middle of my room. Toga and Dabi stepped through and the portal closed behind them. Toga let her eyes wander around the room with obvious curiosity and remarked that I must be a big fan of All Might. I explained that it had always been my dream to become a hero like him, though I still struggled to use my quirk without injuring myself. Dabi suggested they start working on my quirk right away. I asked what he meant, and he repeated that they had offered to train me. Yuzora invited me back to the League of Villains hideout to train there. When I asked what LOV stood for, they told me it was the League of Villains. I realized then that these were the villains people talked about. Toga hurriedly pleaded for me not to be angry with them. I told them I wasn't mad as long as they didn't hurt innocent people. I said I believed they were sincere about doing hero work in their own way, since they had saved me without knowing me. That seemed to convince them, and they were glad I trusted them. I changed into my PE uniform, thinking it would be easier to train in, and Yuzora sent a text to Kurogiri to open a portal. A moment later a portal opened and we all stepped through into what looked like an abandoned bar. Toga called out for someone named Shigaraki. A man with light blue hair and hands clinging to him appeared. Shigaraki asked who I was. Dabi identified me as Izuku Midoriya from Class 1A at UA. Shigaraki reacted in alarm at the idea of a hero being in their hideout. Yuzora told him to relax and reminded him that they had saved my life twice, so I was unlikely to betray them. He was introduced properly, and I offered a nervous hello and held out my hand. Shigaraki reached toward me, and Yuzora quickly swatted my hand away. Yuzora explained that Shigaraki's decay quirk would have caused severe harm if they had touched, and apologized for the suddenness. I stared at Shigaraki, shocked that something so dangerous had almost happened. Shigaraki grumbled but allowed it, and the group said we were taking me to the training room to help me work on my quirk. On the way, we ran into Kurogyri, who greeted me warmly and asked what had brought me there. I told him that Toga, Dabi, and Yuzora were helping me train. Kurogyri asked if he could join, and I thought more people helping would be better. The 5 of us headed into the training room. Dabi turned to face me and asked if I was ready. We entered a massive training space filled with all kinds of equipment. I explained everything I knew about my quirk except for the All Might-related details. I described how, at first, I focused all my power into a single arm or leg and ended up breaking the part one used. Then I learned to focus it into a single finger to reduce damage, but I could only use either nothing or everything. During my hero internship, I discovered that I needed to spread the power throughout my whole body instead of concentrating it in one place. That allowed me to use a small percentage of my power without injuring myself, and now I could use about 5% safely. Dabi said they should start by seeing what 5% could do. After a warm-up, Dabi led me through drills and exercises to see my full potential at 5%. The others cheered and offered suggestions. By the time we finished, I was exhausted. I checked my phone and saw pictures and videos of us hanging out on people's social stories. It was late but everyone was still together. Dabi noticed I looked tired and offered me a place to sleep at the hideout. Kurogyri assured me it would be no trouble and that I was welcome anytime. Since everyone else was still out and it was getting late, I decided to stay. Toga announced excitedly that Izuku would be sleeping over, jumping up and down. They left the training room and led Izuku to a guest bedroom at the end of the hallway. The room had a queen-size bed with plain white bedding, a nightstand with a small lamp, a simple desk and chair, an empty walk-in closet, a full-length mirror, and a bathroom. Dabi said Izuku could shower in the bathroom and that he would bring over a pair of clothes and leave them on the bed. They would all eat together in about an hour. After they left, Izuku spent some time looking around the room. It was simple and plain, but also comfortable. The bathroom and walk-in closet felt like luxuries. It would look even better with a few decorations, he thought. An hour later, Dabi had ordered pizza and they managed to convince Shigaraki to join them. They spent the evening talking and laughing together. Shigaraki told Izuku that the young man was starting to grow on him and that maybe the others had been right to trust him. Izuku asked everyone to call him Izuku, and he returned a small smile to Shigaraki. When it grew late and everyone was ready to sleep, they headed back to their rooms. Dabi pointed out the rooms across the hall and said his room was right across from Izuku's, and he pointed out Toga's, Yuzora's, and Shigaraki's rooms. They all said goodnight, and Izuku got into bed and quickly fell asleep, this time without a nightmare, only happy dreams about his new friends. Izuku woke up exhausted and checked the time, 7. He had forgotten to set an alarm because he usually used the alarm clock in his dorm room. The LOV hideout was far from school and he worried he would never make it in time. He jumped out of bed, stumbled to the bathroom, brushed his teeth, washed his face, and brushed his hair. Dabi came in and asked what was wrong, having heard him moving around. Izuku said he was going to be late. Dabi offered to wake Kurogyri and tell him to warp Izuku to school. Dabi returned with a very sleepy-looking Kurogyri, and Kurogyri asked where to take him. Izuku explained he needed his uniform from his dorm room first, and then a portal near his classroom would save time. Kurogyri opened a portal and they stepped through. Izuku hurried to change into his uniform. Then Kurogyri opened another portal to a little hidden area of the school near his classroom. Kurogyri told Izuku to text if he needed anything else, and Izuku thanked him before hurrying off. Izuku arrived at his seat about 2 minutes before class started. Uraraka noticed he looked tired and asked if he had gotten enough sleep. Izuku admitted he had been up late training. Uraraka advised him not to push himself too hard and to try to get to bed earlier. Before Uraraka could reply, Aizawa entered the classroom, looking sleepy. He informed the class that they would be battling each other one-on-one today. Izuku panicked internally at the announcement and worried that he was not ready. Aizawa outlined the order of battles and finished by announcing that Bakugo would face Midoriya last. Hearing that he would face Bakugo alone filled Izuku with dread. He knew Bakugo did not hold back. They went outside to warm up. The first pair to battle moved to the middle of the field while the rest of the class sat on the bleachers. Aizawa explained that the first person to be knocked out of bounds would lose, even if only a small part of their body crossed the line. As he watched other pairs fight, Izuku tried to think of a strategy to beat Bakugo. His thoughts drifted to Dabi and the rest of the LOV. He remembered that they had offered to help whenever he needed it, so he pulled out his phone and messaged the group chat. Izuku asked the group if they could help him. Toga replied warmly that she would do anything for him. Yozora said she would be happy to help. Dabi asked what he needed. Izuku explained that he was at school and had to battle people one-on-one, then added that he would be battling Bakugo. Toga sent an encouraging message telling him not to be nervous. Dabi said he would add Shigaraki to the chat to help as well. Dabi added Shigaraki, who asked why he had been added and wanted to know what was going on. Yozora explained that Izuku needed help preparing to face Bakugo. Shigaraki asked if anyone knew Bakugo's fighting style or go-to moves and referenced Izuku's journals. Izuku confirmed he had studied Bakugo but worried it might not be enough. Kurogiri apologized for joining late and reminded Izuku of a training drill they had practiced previously, suggesting he use spacing and timing to create openings and to rely on movement to avoid direct hits. Izuku acknowledged the advice and thanked everyone. Kurogiri, Yozora, Toga, Shigaraki, and Dabi all sent supportive messages. Toga expressed affection in a friendly, upbeat way, and Shigaraki and Dabi offered steady reassurance. Izuku blushed a little at the supportive messages and tried to hide his phone, but Uraraka noticed his flushed face and asked if he felt sick. Izuku said he was fine. He turned off his phone and set it beside him. He was so dazed that he did not realize Aizawa had called his name, and he felt a hand on the back of his head as Aizawa snapped him to attention. I turned around and saw Kaken looking furious at me as always. He accused me of not hearing him call my name and insulted me harshly. I apologized and got up, following him out to the field. I wondered if this strategy would work. Izuku POV. Kaken and I took our positions on the field while Aizawa counted down the start. The teacher completed the countdown and signaled us to begin. Kaken unleashed an explosion toward me immediately, but I managed to dodge just in time. Because of everything I had written down in my journals, I could anticipate his moves. At first I dodged all his attacks, but once he realized what I was doing he adapted and came close to landing hits several times. He demanded to know how I kept dodging, his voice rough with frustration. After a few more near misses, he finally scored a hit. I fell back to the ground coughing. He accused me of going easy on him and ordered me to stop dodging and actually fight. It was time to try the technique Kurogiri had suggested. I started running straight toward Kaken. He prepared to fire, but at the last second I shifted direction and ran past him. Before he could react I struck his back with a 5% blow. It was not much compared to my full potential, but it sent him out of bounds. I watched in stunned silence. I had beaten Kaken. The bleachers were full of shocked faces. That moment explained a lot about why I felt disconnected from my classmates. Few of them truly believed in me. Uraraka and Ida still talked to me, and Todoroki and Azui checked in occasionally, but I craved friends who would always be there to listen, believe, help, protect, and stand up for me. These people did not feel like those kinds of friends. I walked back to the bleachers and joined the rest of the class. First, I pulled out my phone and messaged the group chat. I announced that I had defeated Kaken. Kurogiri congratulated me, and Toga said they had always believed I could do it. I thanked them, saying I could never have done it without their help. Kirishima told me that my win had been unexpected and praised my effort. Uraraka asked how I had managed it. I shrugged and explained that I had simply tried to win. In the chat, I mentioned that using my power this time had felt different. It seemed to do more damage than usual. Kurogyari asked if my arm hurt, and I said it did not. Dabi suggested I might have mastered control of more power and asked how much stronger it felt. I estimated about twice as much, and Yuzora calculated that would mean I had used 10%. Tokoyami reminded me to check on Kaken in person instead of texting. I told him I would. Dabi added that they would pick me up from my dorm after school to assess my capabilities and do more training to ensure I could control this new level of power. I agreed. I turned off my phone and walked over to where Kaken sat. He looked beaten and defiant. He dismissed my concern with a scoff, saying someone like me couldn't do anything to make him not all right and that I had just gotten lucky. I walked away with my head down. His words cut into me sometimes. I reminded myself that I would see my friends after school. After a long day of reviewing battle techniques, class finally ended. I ran back to my dorm, changed into my PE uniform, and checked social media while I waited for my friends to arrive. A few minutes later, a portal appeared in the center of my room. Yuzora stepped out, grabbed my hand, and urged me to come along. When we stepped through the portal, we were already in the training room surrounded by the group. I was surprised and glad to see Shigaraki there. He told me he was proud of me for beating Kaken and that it would be a shame for my potential to be wasted, so he was there to help. I thanked him. Dabi announced that they would begin training. They had me repeat the same drills as before, and this time we estimated that I was using 8% for each activity without trying too hard. As training progressed, they pushed me to try harder in small increments. By the end of the session, I was able to reach 15%. I felt exhilarated and wanted to show the class, but Shigaraki suggested it would be cooler to keep it a secret and reveal it in the next battle. Toga agreed that the surprise would be better. I thanked them all for their help. Yuzora said it was no problem, and Kurogyari asked if anyone was hungry. We all answered that we were and ordered pizza. We spent the evening talking and laughing, enjoying the company. We went to bed earlier than last time because I had to wake up early for school. I remembered to set an alarm for 6:45 a.m. and fell asleep without nightmares. The next morning I sat at my desk waiting for class to start, still amazed that I could control 15%. Aizawa entered and greeted the class. He said that today we would be working on improving our physical attacks and defense without using quirks, and the training for the day began. The teacher told everyone to get changed into their PE uniforms and meet outside. The day went by just like any other. Kaken was as mean as always, my friends were as fake as always, and I spent the whole day waiting for school to end so that I could train with the League of Villains. The whole week passed the same way. Because they did not want anyone to be suspicious, the League had made a schedule for my training. On most days they kept things light and finished early so they could take me back to my dorm and I could hang out with the other students. On other days we had much longer, harder sessions and I would sleep over at the hideout. Those were my favorite days. You might think it's strange that I preferred the days when I had to work harder just because I got to spend more time with them, even though I already saw them regularly. I didn't mind the hard work if it meant I would become the #1 hero. Besides, their methods taught me more than some other training I had gone through before. One rest day I was sitting on my bed in my dorm, bored and wanting to see the League. I sent them a message saying hello. Toga replied cheerfully, and Dabi texted back calling me Bunny, which made me flustered for a moment. At the same time, at the hideout, Dabi was criticizing Toga's method for dealing with a restrained man and urging her to keep things quiet. Toga answered that she liked to prolong things and watch the others' reaction. Dabi snapped that making noise would get them caught, and Toga responded with a teasing retort. The exchange was tense, but it stayed on the level of dark banter rather than anything graphic. Back in my dorm I checked my phone again and sent another message asking if they were busy. Dabi replied that they were not. I nervously asked if they wanted to hang out. I immediately regretted it, convinced they only put up with me out of pity. Even so, Dabi answered that they would love to, and Toga excitedly asked if they could go somewhere fun. Dabi told me they would be at my dorm in about 30 minutes. When they arrived a short while later, Kurogyari and Shigaraki could not make it that day, Toga explained. I told them it was fine and that I was just glad they came. We all sat on my bed and began to discuss what to do. Toga shouted carnival as an idea, and the rest of us quickly agreed. Dabi pointed out that, because they were not known to the public, they still had to be careful and suggested disguises. He proposed going back to the hideout to change. We went to the hideout and everyone went to their separate rooms to get ready. Toga emerged first looking unexpectedly sweet and girly in a floral dress and a flower crown. The change surprised everyone. Yozora came out next wearing a different, more mature outfit than usual. They both seemed pleased with their appearances. They returned to Izuku prepared to go to the carnival, ready to blend in for the outing. A white bandeau, an unzipped cropped black jacket, short black jean shorts, and strappy black heels. She added glitter to her hair and extra highlighter so she sparkled even more than usual. The last person to emerge was Dabi, wearing a disguise to hide his body. He had black aviator sunglasses over the stitched skin under his eyes, a mask over the lower part of his face to cover the stitches there, a white long-sleeve turtleneck to cover his neck and arms, black fingerless leather gloves because his scars reached his hands, ripped jeans, and a pair of high-top Vans. Izuku felt his cheeks flush at the sight of him, embarrassed by how attracted he felt. Toga teased that the mask looked nice. Dabi replied that he had not been able to find any of his other masks. Dabi then smirked at Izuku and asked how they all looked. Izuku stammered that they looked good, and tried to explain he meant everyone, not just Dabi. Toga thanked Izuku and hurried to the door, grabbing his hand and pulling him along with surprising strength. They walked to the carnival instead of taking a portal because it was nearby. Izuku and Toga went straight to the line at the ticket booth, bouncing with excitement. He started to feel a little down wondering what Kaken would think of him, but Toga asked what he wanted to do first. The question reminded him that Toga understood his enthusiasm, and he felt free to be himself. Izuku began listing options for which rides to do and in what order, trailing off when someone chuckled behind him and placed a hand on his shoulder. Dabi remarked that Izuku tended to mumble. Dabi added that it was cute. Izuku whispered, anxious and surprised, asking if they were upset with him. Yozora reassured him that they could not be mad over something so small. Dabi dismissed Kaken's opinions as unimportant. Yozora noticed Izuku's flushed face and asked if he was okay. Izuku said he was just a little warm. After buying tickets, they looked for the first ride. Dabi suggested the Ferris wheel, and Toga protested, saying the Ferris wheel should be last. She thought he sounded like he had never been to a carnival before. Dabi admitted he had not, and Yozora said she hadn't either. Izuku and Toga reacted with disbelief. The group agreed their job was to make sure everyone had a perfect day, and they all laughed together before walking into the carnival, ready to have fun. The first ride was the bumper cars, followed by the scrambler and a few other smaller attractions before they tried a roller coaster that was not the largest in the park. Izuku admitted he was a little afraid of very big roller coasters. Dabi said the coaster they had been on had been pretty fun and suggested going on an even bigger one next. Toga and Yozora were enthusiastic. Dabi asked Izuku if he was scared. Izuku tried to deny it, though he admitted he might be a little nervous. Dabi promised they would not judge him and said that if Izuku was not having fun, they were not having fun either. Izuku insisted he would be fine and they should catch up to the others. They joined the girls in line. The wait was shorter than Izuku had expected, and soon they were seated on the roller coaster. Izuku sat next to Dabi, while Yozora and Toga sat behind them. As the ride was about to start, Dabi checked again that Izuku was sure he was not scared and offered, with a teasing tone, to hold his hand if he got frightened. They laughed together at the joke, and the ride began to move. It felt fun at first, but as the cart climbed the slope slowly, Izuku had time to feel his nerves rising. I was on the verge of losing it when someone grabbed my hand. I looked over at Dabi and he gave me a small, warm smile. Even though it was small, it made my heart race. I faced forward, closed my eyes, and took a deep breath. When I opened them we dropped, and the rush was exhilarating. After the ride, Dabi and I walked through the exit and waited for the girls to catch up. When they approached, they were smirking at us. I glanced at Dabi and noticed he seemed oddly interested in the floor. Then I looked down and realized we were still holding hands. I let go quickly and the girls giggled. Dabi asked where the food stand was. Yozora indicated the left. As we were walking toward the food stand, Toga abruptly told them to stop and pointed excitedly at a ride she had spotted. Izuku wondered if the sign read the love tunnel. Toga insisted that one could not go to a carnival without writing it. Izuku mentioned that he had thought it was only for couples. Yozora repeated the word couples, curious. Toga explained that it was fun no matter who wrote it and suggested they pair up in twos, proposing she ride with Yozora while Dabi should ride with Izuku. Izuku agreed, hoping the situation would not be too awkward. At the front of the line, the ride attendant pointed to their seats and playfully called them lovebirds. Dabi found himself seated beside Izuku in a little swan-shaped boat while Toga and Yozora were in the boat ahead. He assumed Toga had suggested the ride to get them alone together and bristled at the romantic music playing in the background. He did not recall saying anything that would invite that kind of setup, but Toga always seemed to interpret things her own way. As the ride began, the boats entered a dim tunnel framed by a giant heart. The tunnel was softly lit with fairy lights. From the low light, Dabi could barely make out Izuku's face and could tell he felt awkward too. Dabi started to offer an apology for Toga's behavior and for the awkwardness, but he was interrupted by Izuku's gasp. Izuku placed his hand on top of Dabi's to get his attention and pointed at the lights. His eyes lit up as he admired the delicate scene. The wonder in Izuku's expression made Dabi relax and feel less tense. They sat quietly for a while with Izuku's hands still resting on top of Dabi's. The silence felt peaceful. Dabi turned his hand over and intertwined their fingers. Izuku looked surprised and then smiled and blushed. The sight of that smile was disarming. Dabi felt an urge to tell Izuku how he felt and began to speak, but the tunnel opened and bright sunlight flooded their eyes as the ride ended. The brightness forced them to pause as they stepped out. Izuku let go of Dabi's hand and rose from the boat to find the girls. Dabi followed him. Toga asked how it had gone and Dabi shrugged, saying it was fine. Izuku enthusiastically commented that the lights had been beautiful and then said he was hungry. They went to a food stand where there was no line and received their orders quickly. They sat at a picnic table under an umbrella for shade. It was hot, and Dabi felt uncomfortable in the extra clothing he wore for his disguise. Yozora remarked that it was a hot day. Dabi agreed and noted that Yozora was not dressed for the heat. Yozora rolled her eyes. Yozora suggested that it would be a good moment to tell Izuku something, and Toga and Yozora both agreed. They told Izuku two things. First, they had figured out how to help him control 30% of his abilities. Izuku was stunned and grateful, overwhelmed by how much they had helped him. He thought about how their actions showed genuine friendship and how different these people were from the villainous image others might give them. They still had emotions, dreams, and ideals. They had simply been denied the same opportunities as many heroes. The second thing the girls said surprised Izuku. They had called themselves his friends, but they meant something more than that. Izuku reacted with confusion, unsure what they intended. Izuku wondered if they really did not think of him as a friend. He felt confused as 1,000 thoughts rushed through his mind during the short pause before Toga spoke again. Toga told him that they thought of him as family. Izuku looked up, clearly shocked, and repeated the word family as if confirming it to himself. Toga insisted that he was special to them, and her tone was unusually sincere. She asked Dabi and Yozora to agree, and both affirmed that Izuku was family. Dabi inwardly echoed the word family, trying to convince himself that it fit how he felt about Izuku. Everyone waited for Izuku's response. He surprised them by shedding a tear. He apologized awkwardly and said that he was just so happy. The others rose and embraced him in a warm group hug. Dabi, not usually sentimental, found that Izuku's openness affected him more than he expected. After they let go and returned to their seats, Izuku still sniffled occasionally. Toga clarified that the conversation was not over. She reminded Izuku that the guest room he always used when he stayed over was no longer just a guest room. Because he was family, it would be considered his room. Izuku's smile widened even more at the news, and Dabi felt a fondness for that smile. Dabi told Izuku that he could move in a few clothes and necessities and that he could come over anytime because the house was now his home too. Izuku thanked them and admitted that the room felt a little plain and unexciting. The others laughed at how suddenly confident and judgmental Izuku sounded. Toga suggested remodeling the room and asked if anyone wanted to help. Everyone volunteered enthusiastically. Dabi added that he had a friend who owned a shop with interesting room decor and offered to send the address. When Izuku's phone buzzed, Toga reacted as if she had seen a ghost upon seeing how he had saved Dabi's name. She asked how he had saved her and Yozora, and he replied that he had them saved as Toga and Yozora. She asked to see his phone and tapped at it for a moment. After handing it back, Izuku noticed the new labels and looked confused. Toga had renamed them Stitch Boy, Psycho, and Starlight, and she asked what his name was in their phones. They all answered in unison that his name was Broccoli Boy. Toga then announced that she had an idea, typed something on her phone, and the group received a notification that the chat name had been changed from the previous nickname to the fam. Toga exclaimed that they were officially family. Later, after they finished eating, Dabi suggested playing some games and finishing the night with the Ferris wheel. He confessed he did not understand what was so special about the wheel, but he went along with the plan. They moved toward the row of carnival games while Izuku admired the prizes with his usual bright enthusiasm. Izuku admitted he had never won a big prize before. Toga offered to try winning by her way, then produced a small knife from her sleeve. Izuku, determined to win fairly, struck a heroic pose and said he wanted to try on his own. Toga paid for the game and the attendant handed her 3 darts. The attendant warned her that the balloons could be tricky and suggested she get help from one of her male friends. Toga declined help at first and played on her own. In a blur of quick, practiced motion, she popped all 3 balloons. The attendant stared in shock as she claimed a large stuffed monkey as her prize and skipped away, the others following. Toga asked Izuku where he wanted to go next. He pointed to a nearby game, while she had a different game in mind. Realizing time was running out if they wanted to play everything and still ride the Ferris wheel, Toga proposed splitting up. She would go with Yozora, and Dabi would take Izuku. Izuku eagerly grabbed Dabi's hand and pulled him toward his chosen attractions. Dabi teased Izuku about his excitement, and Izuku apologized bashfully. Dabi told him not to apologize and admitted he thought it was cute, causing Izuku to blush and look away. They reached a shooting game where players used water guns to hit moving targets. Because it was just the 2 of them, the winner would receive one of the small prizes. Dabi stopped Izuku from taking money out and told the attendant that he would pay. They sat on the stools, and when the attendant announced the start, they began to aim and fire at the targets. The game was straightforward, and they both focused on trying to get the most direct hits. But I really liked seeing that smile on his face, so I may have, just a little, let him win. The worker announced that player number 1 was the winner. Izuku cheered with delight. A carnival attendant asked what prize he would like. Izuku thought for a second before pointing to a small purple and blue dog plushie. The attendant handed him the plushie and Dabi began walking away toward the other games. Izuku offered the plushie to Dabi, surprised and grateful that he had really won it. Dabi felt his cheeks heat up and was relieved his mask hid the blush. They scanned the rows of games until Izuku stopped in front of a basketball toss. Dabi asked if he wanted to play, but Izuku shook his head and said he had only been looking at the prizes and did not think he could win. Dabi recognized which prize Izuku had his eye on and decided to try. He paid the operator and started the game. The challenge was to make as many baskets as possible without rushing. Dabi dribbled, focused, and sank most of his shots. When the timer ran out, he had scored enough for a top-tier prize. The attendant praised the score and told him to pick any prize. Dabi chose a white bunny stuffed animal with green ears, a green bow tie, and a pink nose. Izuku called out excitedly that Dabi had done amazing. Dabi handed the bunny to Izuku and told him it was for him. Izuku, blushing, teased that it was a bunny for his bunny and then burst into a giggle. He pulled Dabi into a surprised but warm hug, and after a brief moment Dabi wrapped his arms around him in return. They stayed embraced for a few more seconds until a notification sounded on Dabi's phone. A message from Toga asked them to meet her and Yozora by the Ferris wheel. Izuku brightened at the idea. Dabi asked what was so special about the Ferris wheel, turning away at first, and then noticed Izuku's expression go quiet and hurt. Dabi immediately apologized, explaining that he had never been on one before and did not understand the fuss. Izuku brightened again and said he was glad to be there for Dabi's first Ferris wheel ride, promising that the experience felt magical when shared with people you cared about. He grabbed Dabi's hand and led him to the big lit Ferris wheel. They found Toga and Yozora waiting. Izuku suggested that the ride could hold 4 but often felt cramped, and offered that he would ride with Dabi while the girls took the next car together. That plan pleased them. Dabi and Izuku sat across from each other and waited for the gondola to begin moving. Dabi teased that it better be as magical as Izuku had promised. Izuku smiled and assured him to trust him, and Dabi admitted that he did. The ride started, paused to let others on, and rose steadily until they reached the top. From that height Dabi could see the entire carnival shimmering below and, beyond it, the wider world stretching outward. Izuku watched the view calmly and asked if Dabi saw how beautiful it all was. Dabi agreed and told Izuku that he was beautiful too. Izuku looked up in surprised embarrassment and blushed harder, which made Dabi smile. Izuku's face flushed even more. The moment felt as magical as Izuku had described, especially with him sitting across the car. Dabi realized he had a new, overwhelming feeling he could not quite name. He found the courage to tell Izuku that he loved him, that his feelings were more than familial affection. Izuku stared at Dabi in stunned silence for several seconds. He asked if Dabi was truly in love with him. Dabi confirmed that he was and that he had felt that way for a long time. Izuku looked down at his hands, fiddling in his lap, and asked why Dabi would love someone like him. A short, steady pause followed before the conversation shifted as the ride descended and the moments settled between them. Izuku spent his Saturday off from school and training with nothing planned. He lay on his bed watching short craft videos and flipping his phone aside when boredom set in. Hanging upside down from the bed, his eyes landed on the stuffed bunny on his desk, and a wash of memories from the carnival the previous week filled his mind. He remembered Dabi winning the dog plush and giving him the bunny. He remembered their laughter and the small privileges they shared. He replayed the Ferris wheel ride and every subtle detail of the topmost moment. Dabi's quiet confession of love, Izuku's stunned reaction, Dabi's affirmation that his feelings had been true for a while, and Izuku's trembling question about why anyone would love him. Those memories lingered as Izuku gazed at the bunny, thinking about what had changed between them and what might yet come next. Izuku started the morning in the same self-doubt he had carried for so long, thinking he was useless and quirkless. Dabi stopped him and reassured him, telling Izuku that he was perfect, smart, funny, and kind, and that he had the kindest heart of anyone he knew. Dabi said he appreciated that Izuku had gotten to know them without judging or shunning them for being labeled villains. He told Izuku he was grateful to have him in his life and asked Izuku to be his boyfriend. Izuku felt tears welling and his voice trembled as he accepted. He said yes, that he had loved Dabi for a while and had not expected his feelings to be returned. Dabi took Izuku's hands and looked at him with affection, telling him he loved him back and calling him by a tender nickname. Izuku returned the sentiment. The rest of the ride was quiet and warm, with Izuku and Dabi holding hands the whole time. When they met Toga and Yozora at the end of the ride, the girls snickered at the sight of the couple still holding hands. They laughed and teased them, prompting Dabi to glare and Izuku to insist the confession had happened the way he described it. The group decided it was getting late and headed back to the hideout, Izuku keeping hold of Dabi's arm until they reached home. Before everyone went to bed, Dabi kissed Izuku's cheek. Izuku blushed at the memory and felt the warmth of that moment, smiling to himself and holding on to the happiness it gave him. Later, Izuku reached for his phone and found a text from Toga asking if he was free. He replied that he was, and they agreed to meet and look for room decor at the place Dabi had suggested before heading to the mall. About 20 minutes later, a portal appeared in Izuku's dorm room and Toga and Yozora stepped out. Yozora told Izuku that Dabi could not make it because he was busy. Izuku said it was fine and admitted he would probably be a blushing mess around Dabi. Toga agreed the recent training sessions had made things awkward. Izuku resolved he needed to get over his embarrassment. Yozora asked if he was ready to go, and Izuku complimented their appearances before they left. Toga teased Izuku to be careful now that he was in a relationship. Izuku replied that he was very attracted to men, though he acknowledged he might once have considered himself bisexual. He explained he had been leaning toward guys lately and reassured them that they were family and there was no romantic interest directed at them. Toga ruffled his hair affectionately, and Yozora complimented Izuku's fit appearance, noting how his training showed in his clothes. The three of them arrived at the mall together. Izuku observed more about both girls from the stores they visited and the items they chose. Yozora favored tasteful, trendy styles and cosmetics without going overboard. She enjoyed fashion and creativity without indulging in childish trends. Toga favored a wider range of interests and wasn't tied to trends, but she knew how to wear a youthful style confidently. While they were walking past a Forever 21 window, Yozora suggested they go inside. She browsed through some bandeau tops and then noticed Izuku in the men's section. He walked toward a display of women's clothing and checked the price of a cropped hoodie that was neon green with sleeve cutouts and fishnet detailing. Toga approached him and put a hand on his shoulder. Izuku startled and stammered that he had just been looking around. Toga said she had been wondering if she could get his opinion on an outfit, and the scene shifted as they continued shopping together. The narrator hesitated, thinking it might be a silly question since Izuku probably did not know much about girls' clothes. Izuku eagerly offered to help. Toga then showed Izuku a white cropped top paired with dark, slightly ripped jeans. Izuku evaluated the outfit, saying he loved the shirt's ruffled sleeves but felt the lace-up collar was too much. Removing the string would make a cute open low-cut collar. He suggested a light wash for the jeans and a slightly above ankle length to match the shirt's vibe. Toga stared wide-eyed and speechless, clearly shocked that Izuku had such a good sense of feminine fashion. The narrator walked over and praised him for his surprising knowledge. Izuku blushed and downplayed it modestly. The narrator and Toga continued complimenting him, convincing themselves he was unusually fashionable for his age. After they finished at that store, the three of them wandered around the mall looking for another shop. When they spotted Hot Topic, all three brightened and hurried inside. They admired some Yuri on Ice collectibles until the narrator suddenly excitedly pointed out Billie Eilish merchandise. Toga and Izuku reacted with equal excitement. They found shirts in their sizes among the messy piles, bought them, and left the store happily chatting and getting to know one another better. Izuku seemed quieter than usual after a few minutes of conversation, so the narrator asked if something was wrong. Izuku confessed that he had never been in an actual relationship before and that he felt unsure if he was good enough for Dabi. He admitted he did not know if he was handling things the right way and felt confused about what he was supposed to be doing, whether they should have had their first kiss yet, and how awkward he got around Dabi. The narrator interrupted to calm him, and Toga suggested he describe each concern one at a time. After taking a deep breath, Izuku started with his most obvious issue. He was always a blushing, stuttering mess around Dabi. Toga agreed matter-of-factly, and the narrator pointed out that the problem sounded like a lack of confidence, prompting Izuku to consider what was holding him back. Izuku explained that his nerves stemmed from being inexperienced in relationships and doubting whether he was good enough for Dabi. Toga expressed confusion at that insecurity. The narrator reminded him that they had known Dabi for a long time and tended to see him as a brotherly figure, which made their perspective different from Izuku's. Izuku described Dabi as seemingly perfect in many ways, kind, caring, and someone who had been especially helpful when Izuku had been in a dark place. He added that Dabi was smart and funny, and that he found him a little bit cute, which made him blush fiercely. The narrator and Toga giggled at how sweet his words were, secretly rooting for the pair. The narrator reassured Izuku that Dabi felt the same way about him, that Dabi found him funny, caring, heroic, and one of the smartest people he knew, with full potential to become a top hero. Toga added that Dabi also thought Izuku was extremely adorable and asked why else Dabi would call him Bunny. Izuku flushed even more at that thought. When the narrator asked whether Izuku had kissed Dabi yet, he admitted he had not. The narrator and Toga encouraged him to build his confidence and assured him that once he did, his relationship with Dabi would likely flourish. At that moment, Toga noticed a nearby lingerie store and exclaimed about it. Despite Izuku's protests, the narrator and Toga tugged him inside. They continued offering gentle relationship advice while browsing. The afternoon passed with laughter and light conversation as the friends moved between shops and enjoyed the rest of their time at the mall. Everyone else was busy, so the 9 of them decided to go to the... Once they arrived, the group kept nudging the narrator toward the back, leaving him trailing behind the others. After they shopped in a few stores and hung out for a while, the narrator pulled Kaminari aside and quietly suggested they slip into a nearby shop to look around and have a little fun. Kaminari agreed. The two of them slipped away from the group and entered a nearby store. They tried to make conversation with a few shoppers, but no one was interested. They moved toward the back of the store to avoid attention. While they were looking around, Kaminari accidentally bumped into someone and immediately apologized as he turned around. Kaminari realized who it was and stammered that it was Midoriya. Midoriya insisted that it was not what it looked like and began explaining. At that moment, Siro's voice came from behind them. The rest of the group had found them. Siro scolded them for sneaking off and mentioned that if they were going into a store like that, he would have liked an invite. Uraraka called the three of them perverts. The narrator responded by saying they were not the only ones acting oddly and pointed out Midoriya. Bakugo demanded who it was. Ashido proclaimed Midoriya a pervert. Midoriya, flustered, insisted again that it was a misunderstanding. Bakugo asked if Midoriya had been dragged into the store unwillingly. Midoriya, relieved to find someone who seemed to understand his situation, confirmed that he had. At that moment, a familiar girl approached Midoriya. She asked him for his opinion on an item of clothing, because she and another friend had been asking Midoriya for fashion advice ever since they discovered he had a good sense of style. Midoriya suggested choosing what felt comfortable and what matched personal taste. The girl thanked him warmly and remained close in a friendly manner. She then addressed the group and asked if they were friends of Midoriya, and the classmates explained that they were from his class at UA. Another girl, Yuzora, came over in eye-catching attire and asked Midoriya which outfit would suit her best. Midoriya recommended a few colors that complemented her. Yuzora said she only wanted a couple of items and suggested she could decide later after trying on a few options. She and the other girl told Midoriya they would go check out and give the group time to talk. When the narrator turned back to the group, he noticed that Mineta had fainted and several others looked shaken. The narrator asked if everyone was all right. Bakugo wiped at his face and glared, demanding to know who these girls were and what they were doing with Midoriya. Midoriya simply said they were his friends. One of the girls then interjected that they were actually more than just friends to him and made it clear they cared about him deeply. Bakugo reacted angrily and demanded what that was supposed to mean, but the girl declined to explain. The narrator remained bewildered at the sudden developments. The blonde explained that they were finished shopping and invited Midoriya to get something to eat, extending the invitation to the rest of the group. Kirishima eagerly agreed, Siro accepted, and Momo remarked that it would be a chance to get to know Midoriya's new acquaintances. The blonde suggested they go to Auntie Anne's, and the group began moving toward the food court. They all decided to go to the food court and arrived after a short walk. Yuzora offered to pay for everyone's meal and pulled out her wallet. Izuku insisted on paying at least half, trying to be polite. Yuzora explained that her father had given her a small increase in allowance that week. Izuku asked how much, knowing well she did not receive a literal allowance in the usual sense. Yuzora produced $200 bills and indicated it would cover the bill, then told the cashier to keep the change. The group was quietly impressed by her wealth. The rest of the group thanked Yuzora while Toga protested that she wanted to be the one to pay. They found a spot to sit together and began eating. Soon the UA students started asking Izuku about his new friends. Ashido asked Toga and Yuzora how they knew Midoriya. Yuzora explained that they had met him at a cafe. Izuku remembered going to a cafe with the villains after they had saved him and realized that explanation fit. Toga added that they had seen him studying alone and thought he seemed interesting. They struck up a short conversation, asked for his number because they did not want to take him away from his studies, and teased that Izuku had not returned their feelings. Toga sighed dramatically and pretended to faint onto Izuku's shoulder before composing herself. She recommended the cinnamon pretzel bites and playfully offered one to Izuku, feeding it to him in a friendly gesture. Yuzora drew attention by casually playing with the straw of her strawberry lemonade in a way that caught the eyes of several onlookers, a mix of charm and confidence rather than anything suggestive. She then offered Izuku a sip of her drink. Izuku accepted and took a long, innocent sip. The other boys watched, surprised by how much the two girls were fawning over Izuku while he remained mostly reserved. Izuku decided to play along a little to have some fun and to show everyone that he was worth more than they expected. He reflected that he seemed to be changing, becoming a more confident person because of the new friends he had made, even if he did not yet see himself as especially special. Uraraka asked how long the two had known Izuku. The girls apologized for not introducing themselves properly and gave their names as Toga Himiko and Yozora Moriya, saying they would not mind being called by their first names. Uraraka pressed for more, suspicious and watchful. Toga teased that Izuku never talked about them, and Izuku laughed, suggesting it might be because the girls could be a bit embarrassing at times. Uraraka expressed a desire to know more. Toga and Yozora said they had to leave because Yozora's father would not want their driver kept waiting. She said the cost of any delay would come out of her allowance. After tidying up their table, they prepared to go. Izuku said goodbye to the Class 1A students and walked off with Toga and Yozora. Once they were a short distance away, Izuku remarked that his classmates had ignored him before but suddenly showed interest when he had friends who attracted attention. Toga reassured him that he had them and that they would never ignore or shut him out. She spoke sincerely, abandoning the teasing tone she had used earlier, and told him she believed in his potential and wanted him to know he deserved to be heard. It was the same thing Izuku had heard from Yozora at the carnival when she had told him he was like family. Yozora had told Izuku that she was right, that he would show everyone soon enough what he was made of, that he was far more special than others realized and even more special than he allowed himself to believe. Izuku had thanked her, practically tearing up. Yozora then put an arm around him and suggested they go to the hideout to decorate his room with everything they had found. Izuku smiled and agreed. Dabi sat on the couch in the hideout, alone and restless. He used to treasure time alone because it meant getting away from Toga and Yozora for a while. They could be annoying, often more than he liked. Lately though, his solitude felt empty. He had returned from some chaotic job and found the hideout quiet. He knew why he felt different, lighter, easier, catching himself smiling more often. It was all because of Izuku. Thinking about him brightened Dabi's mood in a way he hadn't expected. The sound of the door opening and laughter cut across Dabi's thoughts. Yozora, Toga, and Izuku came in, laughing together. Toga wiped a tear from her eye, delighted by whatever prank they had been pulling. Dabi asked who they had been messing with. He hoped it had not involved Izuku in any reckless way. Toga called out to Dabi as soon as she noticed him, then hurriedly explained that they had to be somewhere else and would be late. She told Izuku they would not be able to help decorate his room and offered Dabi as a substitute helper. Dabi kept his annoyance off his face but inwardly felt pleased at the chance to spend time with Izuku alone. He scowled instead, which made Toga grin. She enjoyed getting a rise out of him. Izuku stammered a nervous acceptance that Dabi could help. Toga and Yozora were gone in an instant. Dabi offered to help take Izuku's bags to his room, and Izuku accepted. After moving the bags, Izuku began separating decorations from the rest of his purchases. He stored some items in his closet to deal with later and focused on arranging the room. When he finished, he found Dabi already sitting on the bed. Izuku flushed with embarrassment at being watched, and Dabi hoped this was an opportunity to help Izuku feel more comfortable. Dabi sat on the floor beside him and began looking through the bags. He noted aloud that Izuku had gathered quite a bit of stuff. Izuku pointed to a group of about a dozen more bags, shyly indicating there was still plenty left. Dabi brought them over and continued sorting. When Dabi held up a bundle, he wondered aloud what it was. Izuku identified them as fairy lights. Dabi asked why 6 bags were filled with them. Izuku explained that Toga and Yozora had teased him about buying too many, but he liked them a lot. He pouted and folded his arms, unable to hide how adorable Dabi found him. Dabi told Izuku that if he really liked the lights, then they were perfect for the room. Izuku reacted with a mix of shock and embarrassment. He also pointed out a pile of greenery, which Dabi described back as the plants and vines Izuku intended to use for the aesthetic he was going for. Dabi asked what they should start with. Izuku suggested decorating the bed first and mentioned he had new bedding and pillows in another set of bags. Dabi opened them and was surprised at the sheer number of pillows, about 20. Izuku admitted he had liked many of them and planned to store a few away to swap out over time. Dabi observed how invested Izuku got in decorating. It would be a long day, but a welcome one. As long as it was spent with Izuku, he thought it would be worth it. Dabi pulled out the bedding from the bags while Izuku selected the pillows he wanted to use. It took Izuku a bit of time to decide, but not as long as Dabi had expected. They worked together to lay out the plain, or as Izuku called it, simple yet stylish white bedding, and Izuku arranged the pillows exactly how he wanted them. Dabi thought they were finished, but Izuku insisted on adding a little something to his aesthetic. He draped a few leafy vines and fairy lights around the headboard, placed a fuzzy white blanket with pom-poms at the end of the bed, and then they were done. Next, they worked on the nightstand. Izuku let Dabi pick out which succulent plants to put on it and then arrange them with a few other decorations. When he finished, there was a white nightstand with a small cactus and a slightly larger aloe vera plant in cute decorative pots, a little light box that read Plus Ultra in black letters, and a small gray lamp. Above the nightstand was a green LED heart and a music note. Dabi asked if that meant Izuku liked music. Izuku replied nervously that, yeah, he guessed so, and Dabi asked if he played any instruments. Izuku looked down and started to fiddle with his thumbs, hesitating to answer. Dabi could tell the subject was sensitive, so he changed the topic and asked what Izuku wanted to decorate next. Izuku pointed to the full-length mirror in the corner and said he wanted to decorate it. Dabi asked in confusion why someone would decorate a mirror. Izuku teased that Dabi knew nothing about decorating and offered to teach him. That confident side of Izuku struck Dabi as beautiful, one of his favorite things about him, alongside his determination, his heroic streak, and his endlessly endearing manner. Izuku blushed and said he would be happy to learn from Dabi. Dabi felt a little sad because he loved looking into those emerald eyes, but Izuku often looked away. After a moment, Izuku walked to the mirror, tilted his head as he thought, and asked Dabi to bring certain things from the bags: plant vines, a tall succulent, and, as expected, more fairy lights. He draped the vines over the mirror, adjusted them so one side reached about halfway down and the other side went about 3/4 down, and then covered the mirror with fairy lights until there wasn't an inch left uncovered. He finished by placing the plant in a basket next to the mirror. Dabi complimented how good Izuku was at decorating. Even though Izuku had his back turned, Dabi could see him get embarrassed from the tense way he stood and the flush that spread across his cheeks. Dabi frowned at the thought that Izuku might feel uncomfortable around him. He decided they needed to talk. Izuku should be able to feel comfortable and be his true self around Dabi, and Dabi wanted to be the one to help him feel safe. Dabi called Izuku's name. Izuku answered and Dabi told him they needed to talk, asking him to turn around. Izuku turned to face him, and Dabi sat on the bed and motioned for him to join. Izuku slowly walked over and sat on the edge opposite Dabi. Dabi asked if he made Izuku feel uncomfortable. Izuku snapped his head up in surprise and stammered that nothing was wrong, that Dabi wasn't doing anything wrong, and that Dabi was perfect, though he became flustered and couldn't say it cleanly. Dabi asked why Izuku always seemed so shy and embarrassed around him. Izuku admitted that he struggled with confidence and looked down at his hands, fiddling in his lap. Dabi pressed gently, asking Izuku to tell him more. Izuku stammered a confession. He really liked Dabi a lot. He hadn't met someone who had hooked him so quickly in a long time. Izuku said Dabi had cared for him from the start and had helped him so much. He believed Dabi was amazing, and he worried he wasn't good enough, afraid of saying the wrong thing, messing up, or making a fool of himself. He called himself weak and dumb and ugly in a moment of harsh self-judgment. Dabi told Izuku not to speak that way and asked him to come closer. When Izuku protested that he was already close, Dabi pointed out that he was practically about to fall off the bed and asked him to scoot in before he hurt himself. Izuku did, and Dabi put an arm around him, pulling him nearer. Dabi lifted Izuku's chin to meet his gaze. Dabi told Izuku that he was special and amazing, kind and helpful to everyone, brilliant when solving problems, and beautiful in Dabi's eyes. Dabi said he loved him and then affectionately pressed his forehead to Izuku's. Izuku giggled and returned the sentiment, wrapping his arms around Dabi and smiling up at him. After that break, they continued decorating. Izuku spent extra time on his desk, arranging hero notebooks in the drawers and leaving one open on the desk, setting up a lamp for studying, placing a container with pens, a little plant, and a few other items. Dabi noticed a couple of small boxes on the desk and asked what was inside. Izuku explained that they were decorative. Dabi admitted he really didn't know much about decorating, and they laughed together for a little while. Izuku loved seeing his bunny laugh. It always brightened his mood and brought a smile to his face. Izuku spent the afternoon with Dabi putting away the things he had brought over a few days earlier. They moved some clothes into the closet and then tackled the bathroom. Dabi helped assemble a few organizers, but Izuku took over when it came to arranging his own things. He liked everything in a very specific order, and Dabi seemed a little stunned by the number of skin and hair care products Izuku owned. Izuku admitted to being proudly gay and laughed at how particular he could be. The next step was the part Izuku had been excited about, mounting color-changing LED strips along the top of the walls. He found a ladder in another room and climbed up. The ladder felt a bit wobbly, but Dabi steadied him by placing his hands gently on Izuku's waist until he felt secure. When Izuku climbed down and stepped back to look around, he felt the room still needed something. He searched through his bags and found a compact, fuzzy white saucer chair he had almost forgotten he bought. With Dabi's help, Izuku placed the chair in the corner near his desk and hung a canopy above it. He decorated the canopy with floral vines and finished it with the remaining fairy lights. The chair and canopy gave the corner a magical, cozy atmosphere. Dabi looked around the finished room and complimented how well it turned out. Izuku played down his role, but Dabi insisted that Izuku had helped a lot and suggested they celebrate with hot chocolate. Izuku said that sounded perfect, and Dabi offered to make it. A short time later, Dabi returned with 2 mugs. He handed the one with extra whipped cream to Izuku. The hot chocolate tasted warm and perfect, and Izuku savored the moment. Dabi sat in the saucer chair and invited Izuku to sit close with him so they could share the warmth of the drink. They sat near each other, sipping and enjoying the quiet comfort of the room. When Izuku had a bit of whipped cream near his lip, Dabi reached out and wiped it away, lingering in a gentle, attentive way. Their eyes met and for a few moments everything else faded. They shared a brief, tender kiss that felt quiet and magical to Izuku. He was overwhelmed with happiness and held on to the feeling as it lingered. After that sweet moment, they finished their hot chocolate and, tired from the day's work, dozed off together in the chair, curled up and comfortable in each other's arms. Later that night, Toga and Yozora returned to the hideout. It was late and they tried to be as quiet as possible. When Toga noticed Izuku's door was open, she peered inside and saw Izuku and Dabi asleep together. She woke Yozora and showed her, and both of them had the same delighted reaction. They quietly took several pictures on their phones, planning to show them later when everyone woke up. Izuku's sleep brought him back to a painful memory. He remembered a time when someone had pleaded with him not to leave, and another voice had cruelly rejected him after discovering he was quirkless. The cruel voice had told him he could never be a hero, insisted he was useless, and mocked his dreams. Izuku remembered how small and stunned he had felt in that moment and how those words had settled into him like a cold weight. He carried that memory with him, but in the quiet of the hideout surrounded by the people who accepted him and the room they had helped create, Izuku found warmth and a sense of belonging he hadn't had before. Someone in the crowd shouted that they would never hang out with a Deku and told him to scram. The boys he had thought were his friends closed in and used the nickname his best friend had given him in a patronizing chorus. Bakugo began to turn away and started to walk off. Izuku reached out and grabbed Bakugo's arm. The whole class joined in, mocking him with the nickname, and the teachers pretended not to notice. In the dream, he begged Bakugo not to leave, pleading that he needed him. Bakugo told him to let go. He kept begging, whispered please, and the classmates repeated the nickname over and over until panic rose and he screamed his own name. Izuku's eyes snapped open. He was sweating and realized his hand was curled around something. He looked to his right and saw he had been holding Dabi's arm. He let go quickly and sat up in his bed, suddenly aware that he had fallen asleep somewhere he did not remember leaving. Heat rose to his cheeks at that memory and at the aftershock of the nightmare. Dabi reached over and placed a hand gently on Izuku's cheek, asking if he was okay and explaining that he had come to see if Izuku was ready for breakfast. Dabi said it had seemed like Izuku was having a nightmare when he grabbed him. Izuku apologized and said he had been dreaming, and then hastened to insist that he was fine and that Dabi did not need to worry. Dabi told him he could share anything that was bothering him and asked Izuku to come to him with whatever he needed. He wanted to be there for him. Izuku rested his hand over Dabi's and offered a reassuring smile. Dabi returned the smile and gave Izuku a comforting touch to his forehead. He invited Izuku to join him for breakfast and mentioned that he had ordered from Silver Diner and paid for it. Izuku thanked Dabi with a warmer, genuine smile. Dabi said he would set the table and left Izuku a little time to wake up. After Dabi left the room, Izuku got out of bed and stretched, telling himself that today would be a good day. Dabi thought that Izuku was not fine. He had heard the dream perfectly, Izuku's pleading for Bakugo not to leave, and the memory made Dabi's protective instincts flare. It was not that he suspected Izuku of anything. It was Bakugo who had hurt Izuku, and Dabi would protect him at all costs. Katsuki would face consequences he would not see coming. Later, while putting dishes into the dishwasher, Dabi suggested that they train since it was Sunday and optional. Izuku said he felt good about training and hoped he might finally reach 30% after a week of hard work. When Dabi had mentioned a way to use 30%, Izuku had assumed it would take only one session, not so many. Dabi reminded him that power required effort, but he also expressed his confidence that Izuku could do it and called him Bunny affectionately. Izuku thanked him. Izuku decided to wait until noon to start because he still felt full from breakfast. He went into his room and checked the clock on his nightstand. It read 10. He pulled his binder from his backpack and flipped to his agenda. He had math and science homework and an English test to study for. Math went quickly. He had always been near the top of the class. Science took longer because he had to explain his answers, and putting his thoughts into writing sometimes scrambled them. When he finished the science homework, he checked the time, hoping he could skip English study until after training. It was only 11 o'clock. Izuku loved the language but had always struggled with pronunciation and mixing things up. He worked through a few simple phrases when there was a knock on the door. Dabi entered and asked if Izuku was ready to start training. Izuku said he had thought they would begin at noon. Dabi pointed to the clock behind Izuku. It read 12. He apologized for losing track of time. Izuku told Dabi that he just had to get changed and would meet him in the training room. Dabi told Izuku not to apologize and to take all the time he needed. Izuku thanked Dabi. Dabi walked toward the training room. Izuku went to his closet, pulled out a black shirt and a pair of green shorts, filled his water bottle, and grabbed a gym bag with sweatbands, an MP3 player, headphones, deodorant, and other supplies. When he arrived at the training room, he saw Dabi leaning against the wall, waiting for him. Izuku thought Dabi looked striking standing there. He started with his usual warm-ups. Dabi offered small pointers to make the routines more effective and added a few extra exercises to help Izuku prepare to use his power at full strength. Dabi then led him through stretches. As Izuku finished stretching, Toga, Yozora, Shigaraki, and Kurojairi entered the room. Toga greeted them cheerfully. Yozora asked if they could watch Izuku train. Izuku said it was fine and that he had just finished stretching, so the real training was about to begin. Each of the villains contributed in different ways to Izuku's training. Yozora focused on finding better alternatives and refining techniques so Izuku could get the most out of each exercise. Kurojairi brought mental and psychological methods into the sessions to keep Izuku focused and controlled. Shigaraki taught combat and fighting style from years of experience. He showed Izuku how to spot weaknesses in how people use their quirks and how to exploit those openings. Shigaraki also encouraged Izuku to understand and manage his own weaknesses, arguing that a well-used weakness could become a source of strength. Toga was exceptional at cheering him on, and her encouragement always brought a small smile to his face. Dabi proved to be a steady source of motivation, often lifting Izuku's determination without realizing it. Izuku had begun training to become more powerful so he could prove his capabilities to those who had doubted or mocked him. Over time his reasons shifted. He no longer trained merely for revenge but to honor the people in that room who had helped him. He wanted to make them proud. For the drill they used a huge block made from a quirk that created near-indestructible material, something Shigaraki had obtained through his connections. Izuku repeatedly prepared and sent punches at the block, But nothing changed. Shigaraki explained that Izuku would know he had used about 30% when a crack appeared in the block. He repeated the cycle: prepare, punch over and over. Toga shouted encouragement. Yuzora voiced belief in him. Dabi offered a more personal word of confidence. Izuku felt a surge of determination, breathed deeply, and struck the block with full effort. The impact knocked him back into the wall where the others were standing. Smoke and dust filled the room, making everyone cough. When the debris began to clear, Dabi's arms were around Izuku, having grabbed him as he fell to make sure he was safe. Izuku and Dabi shared a brief, meaningful look before Toga cleared her throat and brought them back to the task at hand. Dabi released his hold and then took Izuku's hand, guiding him to join the rest of the group. Izuku felt flustered and embarrassed. Izuku wondered aloud what had just happened. Yuzora pointed out that it had not been 30%. Shigaraki confirmed that the strike had been full force. Shigaraki left the training room briefly and returned with many more of the blocks. Since the first time Izuku had used his full power, he had been thrown back. The focus now was on learning to wield that force without harming himself. After roughly 30 more attempts, Izuku only stumbled slightly after each punch. Everyone wore masks to avoid inhaling any debris. By around 4 in the afternoon, Izuku could maintain his balance and stand steadily after each strike. He also tried several kicks, which proved easier to control than the punches. They agreed to call it a day and went their separate ways. Izuku returned to his room and took a long, hot shower to relax his muscles after the intense training. He considered a full pamper routine but decided to wait until bedtime. He dressed in comfortable sweatpants and an old t-shirt, then sat at his desk, turned on the reading light, and laid out his study materials. A knock sounded at the door, and Dabi entered, closing the door behind him and walking over to the desk. Dabi asked if Izuku was busy and suggested they hang out that night. Izuku explained that he would love to but had schoolwork that might take a while. Dabi apologized and offered to help. Izuku pointed out, with a teasing tone, that Dabi had dropped out of school. Dabi replied that he had finished middle school and had been in advanced classes, claiming to be good at most subjects. When Izuku asked what work he had to do, Izuku reported that he had already finished math and science and only needed to study for an English test, which he feared would take the whole night. Dabi said he would at least be able to help a little. Izuku was surprised that Dabi was fluent in English. Dabi explained that their mother was half American and had grown up in the United States, so she had taught English to the children when they were young. Dabi mentioned that he had 2 younger brothers and a younger sister. Some of them were uninterested in learning, but Dabi and his youngest brother had enjoyed learning together, and it had been a way for them to bond. There was a brief, thoughtful silence. Izuku gave Dabi space, recognizing that Dabi might need time to clear his mind. After a moment, Dabi asked what the test covered. Izuku listed greetings, colors, numbers, days of the week, months, and basic adjectives like good, bad, smart, kind, and beautiful. Dabi complimented Izuku gently, calling him beautiful. Izuku felt a warmth hearing Dabi's voice. Dabi then suggested quizzing Izuku to see what he already knew and making flashcards for the rest. They studied for about 35 minutes. When they took a break, Izuku began tidying his papers and putting them into a binder. Dabi sat nearby and leaned in, and the two of them met each other's gaze. Dabi said he might be a bit hungry, and Izuku offered to get snacks. They shared a quiet, vulnerable moment and then agreed to take a break and get something to eat before continuing to study. Later, Izuku reflected on how surprised he had been by Dabi's fluency and their easy companionship. Dabi felt a strong protectiveness and admiration for Izuku, touched by his kindness and intelligence, but he kept those feelings restrained and focused on being supportive. They returned to their studying with renewed calm and a clearer plan for the test. It felt warm and familiar, something I could never get tired of. After a while they pulled away, faces flushed and dazed. Izuku looked beautiful like that. I bent down and placed a light kiss on his nose. Dabi told Izuku that he loved him. Izuku returned the sentiment. Izuku still had a long way to go with his English, so it was time to get back to studying. Izuku asked Dabi how to say I love you in English. Dabi answered that the phrase was I love you. Izuku repeated the phrase, practicing it carefully. Dabi praised Izuku for being a fast learner. Izuku blushed and went back to writing his flashcards. They continued studying for a while longer, taking a few short breaks, and finally agreed they had done enough for the night. Izuku apologized and looked guilty about taking Dabi's time. Dabi reassured him that it had not been a waste, that the important thing had been spending time together and helping him study, and that he wanted to see Izuku succeed. Dabi pointed out that it was only 8 o'clock, so they could still do something fun. Izuku asked if Dabi had anything in mind. Dabi said he felt like staying in. Izuku suggested watching something and relaxing on the couch. Dabi thought cuddling up and relaxing sounded perfect. He ruffled Izuku's hair and led him to the kitchen to find snacks, only to discover that the others had eaten them all. Izuku suggested a quick run to the convenience store. They agreed and each went to get changed. Dabi dressed in ripped black skinny jeans, a plain white shirt, and an unzipped black jacket. He added a black mask with a fong design to cover his mouth and chin. Izuku came out in similar ripped black jeans and a white hoodie. He stood in front of Dabi, tilted his head as if studying him, reached up and removed the mask, then ran off with it. A minute later he returned holding something behind his back. Izuku explained that Dabi did not need that specific mask, only a different one, and produced a mask with an animal nose and mouth. Izuku said it was the one Dabi had worn to the carnival and that he liked seeing Dabi in it, and asked him to wear it. Dabi sighed and, unable to refuse, put the new mask on. Izuku smiled broadly and asked if it was better. Dabi agreed and they set off, hand in hand. The walk to the convenience store was short and comfortable in a quiet, contented silence. At the store Dabi held the door for Izuku and went to the drinks aisle while Izuku browsed snacks. Izuku normally avoided sugary drinks because of his training, but tonight he was willing to let that slide. After picking out a few sodas, Dabi returned to the snack aisle and froze at the sight of Izuku laughing and being friendly with some other guys. That made Dabi uneasy. Izuku POV. Dabi had gone to get sodas while Izuku looked for snacks. He scanned the chip aisle and grabbed a bag of Dabi's favorite along with one of his own. There were so many candies to choose from that deciding was hard. When in doubt, Pocky. When not in doubt, Pocky. Always Pocky. He moved down the aisle to the Pocky section and searched through the boxes: strawberry, almond crush, banana chocolate, cookies and cream. He frowned when he couldn't find the original chocolate Pocky. He dug through the rows but couldn't reach the one he wanted at the back. Leaning against the wall with a sigh, he resigned himself to waiting for Dabi. Spotted a small red box on the very top shelf chocolate Pocky. He knew he had to have it. He tried to reach on tiptoe but came up short. Just then something zipped past his face and he saw tape trailing from the top shelf, attached to the box of Pocky. Shiro and Kaminari stepped out from around the corner holding the prize. Shiro tugged to pull the Pocky down and declared they had gotten the last one. They began to walk away but then noticed Izuku and called out to him cheerfully. Kaminari exclaimed that he had not expected to see Izuku there. Izuku managed to stammer a hello, eyes glued to his feet. Shiro greeted him with excitement and asked what was up. Izuku nervously said he was just there to get a few snacks and asked how they were doing. Shiro replied that they were doing the same and that Bakugo had asked them to pick up snacks on the way to his house, and he asked if Izuku had been coming too. Izuku admitted he had not been invited. Shiro, surprised, said that Bakugo had invited everyone from their class except Mineta and that he must have invited Izuku, reminding him that they had been childhood friends. Izuku laughed nervously and thought he had no idea how to handle the situation. His anxiety did not calm when he felt an arm go around his shoulders, but a familiar voice quickly settled him. Dabi returned and asked who the other boys were. Izuku turned and saw Dabi glaring at Kaminari and Shiro. Izuku wondered if Dabi was being protective and felt a rush of affection, but he kept his composure because he did not want to make Dabi worry. Izuku explained that they were just a few friends from school. Shiro introduced himself as Denki Kaminari and Hanta Shiro and asked Izuku who Dabi was. Dabi answered coldly that his name was Dabi. Shiro commented that Izuku seemed to have a lot of friends outside of school. Izuku answered quietly. Dabi was internally annoyed that someone else was using Izuku's first name so casually and that Izuku had not corrected them. He felt protective and grabbed Izuku's arm, leading him toward the front of the store to check out without paying much attention to the two boys behind them. After paying, he started walking back to the hideout. The quiet was broken by quiet laughter from behind them that soon erupted. Dabi asked Kaminari what he was laughing about. Kaminari teased that Dabi had looked adorable and that he must have been jealous. Dabi denied being jealous and tried to stay composed. Kaminari persisted, insisting Dabi had not even corrected them when they called Dabi Izuku's friend. Dabi accused him of being jealous again. Kaminari laughed and pressed the point. After a moment of silence, Dabi accused Kaminari of not correcting them. Kaminari said he had known Dabi was jealous and teased him for it. Dabi, exasperated, told Izuku not to dismiss the conversation and asked if Izuku was embarrassed to be in a relationship with him. Izuku looked up with wide eyes and immediately denied it. He told Dabi that he loved him and would never be embarrassed of him. Dabi asked why Izuku had not told them that Dabi was his boyfriend. Izuku hesitated and then explained that he had not yet come out to his class. Dabi softened and apologized for jumping to conclusions, and Izuku admitted he should have told Dabi about the situation earlier. Izuku added that, besides his mother, Dabi and a few close people were the only ones who knew he was gay. Dabi said he was glad Izuku trusted him so much, surprised that Izuku would hide something like that from him. They continued walking back to the hideout with Dabi teasing Izuku playfully and wrapping an arm around him. The conversation was light, but Izuku kept a slight pout that he was trying to hide. Dabi noticed and asked what was wrong. Izuku said nothing at first, then insisted he was fine. Dabi tried a softer nickname and read Izuku like an open book, reaching into the shopping bag and pulling out a box of Pocky, which he tossed to Izuku. Izuku's face lit up at the sight of it. Dabi offered a quick explanation about finding an extra box on a shelf by the register. Izuku felt a small, private relief and chose not to press for further details. He promised himself that he would keep Izuku happy for as long as he could. They arrived back at the hideout a few minutes later. Dabi suggested they hang out in his room because he had a TV. Izuku felt nervous excitement at the idea of being inside his boyfriend's bedroom, a place he had never seen before. Dabi asked if Izuku was okay when his nervousness showed through. Izuku reassured him and offered to set up the TV while Dabi brought the snacks in. Dabi insisted he would set it up himself, but Izuku hurried into the room to give himself a moment to calm down. Dabi's room was decorated with band posters, many of which were Izuku's favorites, and the bedding and furniture had a black and white aesthetic with blue accents. Izuku noticed an organizer on the closet door filled with different masks that covered the lower part of the face. Before he could look around more, Dabi rushed in seconds later. Izuku asked if something was wrong. Dabi replied that nothing was wrong. Izuku noted that Dabi was acting strangely and reached for the TV remote, opening Netflix to get everything ready. I could see that Dabi was looking a bit on edge out of the corner of my eye. I wondered if he was hiding something. I scrolled through the different categories on Netflix: action, drama, trending, and when I passed the continue watching section, something peculiar caught my attention. It was more surprising than I expected. It felt like I didn't even know who he was. I wondered whether he had ever planned to tell me about this or if he intended to hide it forever. I called his name to get his attention. He answered hesitantly and avoided eye contact, clearly nervous. I chuckled and told him to calm down and that he wasn't in trouble, amused by how shy and flustered he seemed. I asked why his account showed he was on season 5 of My Little Pony. He answered defensively that he had watched all 8 seasons on Netflix 6 times and was simply rewatching them. He huffed and crossed his arms, clearly not pleased with my teasing. Then he realized what he had just admitted and began to stammer, struggling for words. I burst out laughing at the sight. He tried to protest, but I pointed out that his account had every Equestria Girls movie in the Watch It Again section and that they had all been added to his list. I also mentioned the Christmas special, surprised that I hadn't known about it. Was trying to uncover all the secrets I could from the account when he suddenly reached for the remote. I dodged to keep it, not ready to give up the opportunity. He had snuck up behind me and wrapped his arms around me to take the remote back, and a brief playful scuffle followed. A short neutral pause kept the moment light. Izuku had his arms around Dabi. Dabi froze and wondered what had just happened. He worried that Izuku had discovered his private interest and panicked at the thought of losing respect. The room felt suddenly warm. Izuku was flushed and visibly flustered, as if generating body heat from embarrassment. Dabi removed his hands from Izuku's waist before the moment became more awkward. Izuku asked what they should watch. Dabi suggested a horror movie, and Izuku agreed. About 25 minutes later, they were both unexpectedly absorbed in the first season of My Little Pony. Dabi admitted to himself that he had suggested a scary movie hoping Izuku would forget what showed up on his Netflix account. He had not expected the cartoon to be comforting, but Izuku was trembling and had curled up as tightly as he could against him at the opening credits. Dabi enjoyed the closeness and did not want to stop it, but he also felt bad seeing Izuku so frightened, so he suggested switching to a marathon of the show instead. Izuku suddenly remembered his Sunday skincare routine and went to the bathroom. Dabi followed to see what he meant. Izuku pulled his hair back with a fuzzy pink headband and explained that it was his Sunday skincare. He invited Dabi to try it with him, insisting it would be fun and promising healthy, glowing skin. Dabi hesitated but accepted. Izuku produced a light blue headband for Dabi as well, and Dabi wondered how many headbands the boy owned. Izuku smirked and said they should get started. Later, after a tiring mission, Toga returned to the hideout with Yozora. Toga complained about how exhausting the mission had been, and Yozora agreed while suggesting they grab a snack from the kitchen. They searched but found little worth taking. Yozora suggested asking Izuku and Dabi to go to the store with them. They went to Izuku's room, but he was not there. Toga stopped Yozora and subtly hinted that Izuku might be in Dabi's room. Yozora caught on after a moment, and the two considered staying away, but their stomachs betrayed them. Hunger won out and they decided to go into Dabi's room and pressure him into buying snacks. They crept down the hallway and Toga slowly opened Dabi's door. Lights from a television reflected on the walls. The two girls were stunned to find Izuku and Dabi sitting together, wearing green face masks, stuffing their faces with junk food, and watching My Little Pony. Toga and Yozora gaped in surprise. Izuku and Dabi looked unsure how to respond, then invited them to join. Toga and Yozora accepted, and the four spent the rest of the night watching the cartoon, snacking, and doing face masks together. That evening, while they cleaned up, Toga told Dabi she was proud he had finally told Izuku about his personal hobby. Izuku expressed surprise that others knew. Toga explained that she and Yozora had known for a while. They had often found Dabi's My Little Pony plushies in his room when they came by to take snacks. Yozora added that the plushies were usually neatly arranged on his bed, which showed that he cared about them. Dabi, a little offended, defended his collection, saying that they were the best plushies available and that he had spent a lot on them and tried to take good care of them. Toga clarified that this was what she had meant by calling it an obsession, but the tone was light and teasing rather than cruel. The four of them finished tidying up, close in a way that made the night feel warm and ordinary. Izuku was proud to have arrived at school early that morning, until he realized early arrival only meant more time for classmates to quiz him about Toga and Yozora. Kaminari enthusiastically asked if Izuku could set him up with one of the girls. Shiro announced that he was claiming the blonde. Izuku felt their words were disrespectful and could not let them pass. Izuku reminded the boys that Toga and Yozora were like sisters to him and not possessions to be called dibs on. He scolded them for acting as if the girls were objects and told them they should be ashamed. Momo, standing with the other girls from class, praised Izuku for speaking up. Kirishima apologized and scratched the back of his head, calling Izuku manly for standing his ground. Bakugo taunted Izuku that he would always be weaker, and Kirishima scolded Bakugo for the rude remark. Izuku noted that neither of the girls were even in their year, they were third years. Mineta reacted in stunned disbelief at that detail. Aizawa stepped out of his yellow sleeping bag and asked the class to quiet down, announcing that class was starting. He told them he had an announcement about an important event before winter break, the UA Sports Festival. He explained that students would have the opportunity to compete against others in their age category, that the event drew attention from across the country, and that pro-hero agencies often scouted for potential interns there. Uraraka expressed amazement at the possibility of an internship, and several classmates reacted with excitement. Aizawa warned them that the competition would be intense and that they needed to train much harder over the next week if they did not want to embarrass themselves on national television. The whole class responded that they understood. Aizawa then told them to change into training uniforms and use the first-year training rooms, allowing students to separate from their classmates if they needed extra space. He fell back to sleep almost immediately. While changing in the locker room, Kirishima complimented Izuku on recently gaining muscle and called him super manly. Izuku awkwardly agreed. Bakugo snapped that Izuku was still weaker than him, prompting Kirishima to chide Bakugo for being mean. When Izuku finished dressing, he left the locker room without waiting for Bakugo's response. As Izuku walked down the hallway, All Might called his name from a short distance away and asked him to follow to his office. Izuku, puzzled, followed in silence. In the office, All Might shifted into his smaller form and acknowledged that Izuku had probably heard about the upcoming sports festival. Izuku answered eagerly that it sounded like an amazing opportunity and that he could not wait. All Might then informed Izuku that he would not be participating. The voices would not stop. They kept telling him he could not be a hero, calling him Deku, repeating that he was quirkless, useless, a nobody. All Might had told him the same thing in the office. All Might apologized and said he had removed Izuku's name from the list of participants, and that he was considering passing one for all to a third-year student, Mirio Togata. All Might added that he had to go and left him in the hallway. Panic set in. The chorus of taunts followed every step. Izuku ran until he found an unlocked first-year training room with the lights off, slammed the door, and collapsed into a corner. He rocked back and forth, hugging his knees while the voices continued to repeat the same cruel lines. He clutched his head and imagined the world closing in. He screamed at his own mind and begged it to stop. The noise would not stop. Then a different sound cut through the chaos. A calm voice told him to be quiet and that everything would be all right. He realized someone else was there. A familiar presence sat with him and offered steady, calming reassurance. That presence guided him to a bench, sat beside him, and stayed until his breathing evened out. Dabi reassured him that he had had a panic attack and that he was there to help. Izuku trembled and asked if that was really what had happened. Dabi confirmed it and said it might happen again, but that the first step was to find the cause. Dabi explained that he had heard the conversation outside All Might's office while he had been retrieving files for a mission. He admitted that he had followed Izuku when he worried about him and wanted to make sure he was okay. Izuku asked whether Dabi now knew the truth about his quirk and whether he truly thought he was no good. Dabi listened, then acknowledged that he had heard everything and understood how the conversation had affected Izuku. For a moment there was quiet between them while Izuku finished calming down. Dabi used English to soothe him, aware that Izuku liked hearing him speak that way, and stayed until the panic passed. Later, alone for a moment, Dabi thought angrily about who had put Izuku through this. He resolved that All Might would pay for what he had done and added him to the list of people he intended to make pay. Izuku sat cross-legged on a mat in the training room while Dabi, perched on a gym bench in front of him, typed away on a laptop. Izuku asked Dabi what he was doing. Dabi answered that he was re-entering Izuku into the list of first-year participants. Izuku argued that it would be wrong to go behind UA staff and that UA's online security would make such a change impossible. Dabi finished the task and announced that it was done. Izuku hurried over to the bench and confirmed that his name now appeared at the top of the list of first-year sports festival participants. He thanked Dabi for the effort. Dabi sat down next to him and teased him about his earlier objections. Izuku admitted that a little fun was acceptable and reminded himself that nothing would seem wrong if he won the festival. Dabi expressed his confidence in Izuku and then shifted the conversation toward training. He suggested they begin training harder than ever. Dabi helped Izuku up and guided him toward the center of the training room, thinking through how to structure the session. Izuku braced himself for another round of intense preparation. Later, Toga walked past Izuku's room and announced that it was time for training. Izuku sighed mentally at the thought of another grueling day but forced himself out of bed despite the soreness. He changed into a tank top and shorts and entered the training room, where Toga, Dabi, Yuzora, and Kurojairi were waiting. Dabi explained that today's training would be less focused on cardio and strength because Yozora and Kurogyuri would be supervising. Yozora and Kurogyuri wanted to work on skills that expanded Izuku's hand-eye coordination and focus. They had considered archery but decided on an alternative that applied to more situations. Kurogyuri brought out a bin and a small rolling table, arranging the contents carefully. He revealed polished throwing knives as the chosen tool for the day's drills. Izuku's chest tightened with shock and nervousness, but he trusted that the practice was intended to help him prepare for the variety of challenges the sports festival might present. Yozora encouraged Izuku as he practiced, praising his progress as he threw repeatedly at rows of targets from different angles. The team had selected knife throwing because the motions and precision could translate to many contest scenarios. After finishing another series of targets, Izuku took a break and joined Toga on the bench to drink water. Toga complimented his performance, and Izuku played down the achievement, noting that most of his hits had felt lucky rather than skillful. Yozora reassured him that his results were impressive for a beginner and encouraged him to be proud of the improvement. When Izuku asked whether anyone there was especially skilled at throwing knives, Yozora and Toga both pointed to Dabi as the best. Izuku glanced toward Dabi across the room, who was setting up equipment. He noticed Dabi's athletic build in his training clothes, and the sight made him a little flustered. Toga teased him for blushing over Dabi's athleticism. Toga called Dabi over. Dabi acknowledged the call and walked toward them to continue the training. Someone jogged over and asked how things were going. Toga slid an arm around Izuku's shoulders and said that Izuku wanted a bit of help from an expert. Dabi offered to help. That was how Izuku ended up with Dabi standing behind him, guiding his hand to show the correct way to line up a knife with a target. The closeness was distracting, so he simply noted that it felt awkward. In the end, he was glad to be better at knife throwing. I sat on a stool at the bar counter in the hideout with an untouched glass of iced tea in front of me. My breath hitched when Dabi wrapped his arms around me from behind and told me not to worry, explaining that he had noticed I was on edge and had come to help me relax. I sighed and leaned back into the comfort. I told him how anxious I felt about the sports festival tomorrow and how I might mess up. Dabi sat down on the stool beside me, took my hands, and reassured me that I would be fine. He praised my dedication, acknowledging how hard I had trained the past 2 weeks, how I had worked on quirk control and physical strength, and how I had learned strategies and ways to analyze quirks. He told me he believed I was ready. His words warmed me. I felt cared for and supported. It was a small refuge of calm. Dabi then suggested I get some rest and led me toward the bedroom corridor. Something still felt missing. Confidence hadn't fully returned. When we reached my room, I sat on the side of the bed. Dabi gently touched my hair and planted a light kiss on my forehead, then hesitated and climbed into the bed next to me, stating that he would sleep there to be close and help me rest. He turned off the lamp and settled in. After a little while, he reached for my hand and held it. That small gesture helped me relax, and I drifted off peacefully. The alarm woke me. I slipped out of Dabi's hold, turned it off, and stretched before taking a quick shower. Wrapped in a towel and finishing brushing my teeth, I noticed Dabi watching me from the bed with a smirk. He told me that he was looking because he thought I was beautiful. I blushed, thanked him, and hurried back to the bathroom to get dressed, feeling embarrassed and oddly happy. At school I walked straight to my desk, avoiding everyone else to clear my head. Aizawa arrived and instructed the class to change into their training uniforms. Our entire class waited in a designated room before heading out to the battlefield for the announcements, and the tension in the air was palpable. Todoroki remained calm while Bakugo loudly proclaimed that he would dominate the competition. When the class went out to the field and saw the packed stadium, my confidence wavered. Bakugo stepped up to make his statement and declared that he was going to win. The remark irritated people, but the first challenge was announced shortly after, an obstacle race. It sounded a bit childish, but this was UA, and everything would be taken seriously. They would probably come up with insane, psycho ways to get as close as possible to killing them without actually leaving anyone dead. He thought he had been right, and yet he had still won. The best part was that he had done it without using All Might's quirk. He could not understand why All Might believed the best hero would be the one who mastered a quirk. He had mastered one for all at full strength, but that did not mean sheer power alone would make him the world's greatest hero. A real hero had the right motivations, the right way of thinking, and a kind heart. He had more to offer than a superpower. That had been his conviction until All Might undermined it. The top 42 students from the obstacle race advanced to the next challenge, a cavalry-style battle. They each had to form teams of 2 to 4. Each player received a point value based on their placement in the first challenge, increasing by 5 points per rank. 42nd place received 5 points, 41st received 10, and so on. Midnight then gave Izuku an absurdly high score, 10 million points, which felt less like fairness and more like sabotage. He resented her for it. He teamed up with Yurika, Hatsum, and Tokoyami. They dropped from first place but still made it into the top 4 and advanced. After the second challenge, they were given a lunch break. He did not expect to gain any advantage by eating with the others, so he slipped away to wander the school alone. It was not difficult to sneak off. Given how well he had been doing, he had assumed more people would watch him, but he overheard students from the business department saying that few were interested in him because he had yet to show his quirk. He should not have been surprised. That was the way society seemed to be. Walking down a hallway, he saw someone far ahead. At first he could not make out who it was, and when he squinted he regretted it. There, unmistakable, was the man he had recently come to hate. He wanted to tell him off for what he had said and done, to point out that he had done better than expected and that he had done it without relying on All Might's quirk. Instead, he froze. His breathing grew heavy and his heart raced. His mind flooded with a million thoughts, none of them the right ones. Tears pricked his eyes. He began to back away slowly, furious with himself for hesitating. That had been his chance. He told himself he was not supposed to fear that old man. He was supposed to feel only anger. But in that moment he could not bring himself to hate him. All Might had been his inspiration for years, something that had kept him going when everyone else treated him as useless for being quirkless. He had watched All Might's rescues over and over in his poster-covered room. In the end, he could not hate him. He could only hate himself. When All Might began to turn, someone suddenly pulled him into an empty classroom and steadied him. He barely had time to react before he felt hands guiding him away from the hallway and into the quiet room. The person who steadied him was Dabi, holding him close enough to support him but keeping the interaction restrained and non-confrontational. A small noise announced the presence of others. Toga and Yozora had entered the classroom and they immediately made the situation more awkward. Toga apologized for the interruption and admitted that seeing them together made her feel oddly single. Yozora said they were there to cheer him on in the tournament and that they were leaving to find a good place to watch before the break ended. He felt embarrassed at being seen in that private moment with Dabi. He thanked them, appreciating the support. As the two began to leave, Dabi stopped them and told them he needed a moment and would be out shortly. Toga teased that she was glad they were keeping their affection private this time. After the two girls left, only Izuku and Dabi remained in the room. Dabi began by telling Izuku that there was no reason to feel bad about what had happened out there. Izuku asked if Dabi had known. Dabi admitted he had and that he had kissed Izuku to distract him and because he had wanted to. Dabi walked closer and took Izuku's hands, assuring him that he would do great out there and that he had no doubts about how things would play out. Izuku felt more confident. Dabi then went to a desk and returned with a container, telling Izuku that he needed to eat something before going back out. After leaning down to kiss Izuku on the cheek, Dabi waved goodbye and went to catch up with Toga and Yozora. Izuku noted that even after dating for a while, Dabi still gave him butterflies. Opening the container revealed a fresh pork cutlet rice bowl, Izuku's favorite. He thought Dabi was simply the best boyfriend in the world. After eating, Izuku heard Present Mike announce that it was time for all students to return to the battlefield for the final event, a one-on-one fighting tournament. Izuku was excited. He had trained hard and hoped to face an advanced opponent. The bracket matched him against a boy named Shinso Hitoshi, whom Izuku had never met. He relied on Shigaraki's lessons about deducing quirks and observed that Shinso looked plain and was not making a move, leading Izuku to suspect a defensive ability. Shinso began asking Izuku small questions, never offering his own opinions, which made Izuku think that answering might give Shinso an advantage. The crowd grew curious why neither had attacked, and the microphones were moved closer. Izuku told the crowd that he had not made a move because it would not be smart without knowing Shinsu's quirk, but he was starting to get a clue. He explained that Shinsu's persistent questions suggested the answers themselves, not their content, were important. Noticing Shinsu's nervous reaction, Izuku announced that he had heard other contestants describe losing memories after answering Shinso and asked if Shinsu's quirk was a form of mind control. Shinsu's eyes widened at the accusation. Shinso laughed, admitted that it had not been difficult to figure out, and then said he was sorry and that he would have to end the match. Izuku braced himself, charging energy into one hand until green veins of light pulsed across his arm. Drawing his arm back, he released a controlled burst of power at roughly half strength. The blast created a dramatic, anime-style gust that filled the battlefield with bright energy and movement. When the air cleared, Shinso had been knocked back and sat against the side of the stands, unconscious but unharmed in appearance. The crowd erupted in cheers, even louder than after Izuku's earlier win. Students from other departments murmured that Izuku's combination of intelligence and strength would draw attention from many hero agencies. While scanning the stands, Izuku's eyes met a pair of icy blue ones for a few seconds. The smile there suggested that the person had known Izuku would win and had believed in him from the start. After the battle, Izuku took a break to watch the next matches and prepare for his upcoming rounds. Uraraka enthusiastically congratulated Izuku, and he replied awkwardly and used to so much attention. Izuku asked who was up next, and Uraraka said that Todoroki would be facing Shiro. I decided to watch the battle carefully because I would be going up against the winner. Shiro took a very direct approach by trying to restrain Todoroki with his tape. At first it looked like Shiro might win as Todoroki was being pushed out of bounds quickly, but Todoroki proved to be no easy target. While wrapped in tape, Todoroki froze himself to the ground to avoid being pushed any further, and then summoned a vast amount of ice that encased half of the arena. Shiro became immobilized by the ice, and Todoroki advanced to the next round. Midoriya noted that he would be facing some strong competition. After the other first-round battles, the contestants advancing were Midoriya, Todoroki, Shiozaki, Ida, Ashido, Tokoyami, Kirishima, and Bakugo. It was Midoriya's turn to fight Todoroki. They both stepped onto the battlefield and Todoroki stood there with a serious expression that made it clear he wanted to win. Midoriya felt the same drive. From what he had seen in the first round, Midoriya knew Todoroki favored an offensive style but could build walls and shields of ice, making him strong on defense as well. Expecting a quick attack, Midoriya prepared. He was still thinking through tactics when Todoroki launched a small amount of ice, about 10% of what he had used against Shiro, so the cleanup would be easier. The crowd cheered for Todoroki. Midoriya understood that he had people supporting him and he wasn't going to give up. Midoriya created a blast from 2 fingers that shattered the ice around him, using about 15% of One for All. The impact sent chunks flying and the crowd's attention shifted. Todoroki's confidence dimmed slightly. He resumed his quick attack, sending wave after wave of ice at Midoriya. Midoriya countered each assault with blasts of power that sent the ice scattering before it reached him. Midoriya thought aloud to himself that he knew Todoroki had more than an ice quirk and that Todoroki could also produce fire. He hoped Todoroki wasn't planning to use that second power to his advantage. Todoroki responded by insisting that he would never use his father's fire quirk and that he intended to surpass everyone using only his ice. Midoriya challenged that approach, saying it didn't look likely given the way the fight was going. The crowd enjoyed the exchange. Midoriya urged Todoroki not to hold back because he wanted a good fight. Todoroki reacted by summoning more fire alongside his ice, regaining the confidence he had briefly lost. They traded blows. Todoroki came close many times, but Midoriya avoided hits using the speed granted by One for All. Todoroki combined ice and fire in rapid succession, and this round proved far more challenging than the previous one. As the match progressed, both fighters prepared for a decisive end. Todoroki gathered his power while Midoriya charged his body with the full force of One for All. It may have seemed drastic, but Midoriya did what he thought necessary. They launched at each other simultaneously. A tremendous explosion of energy burst across the stadium in classic, dramatic fashion. When the dust cleared, one of them stood in the center of the battlefield mostly unharmed, while the other staggered to the entrance, bruised and battered, before collapsing unconscious. Midoriya realized he had won the second round. The stadium erupted in cheers, and the victory felt exhilarating. On to the next round. The winners of the second round were Midoriya, Ida, Tokoyami, and Bakugo. Midoriya found the match against Ida easier than his match against Todoroki. Ida used a straightforward approach, and Midoriya used his speed and reflexes to counter. Just before being pushed out of bounds, Midoriya planted his feet and used his strength to stop their momentum. He then grabbed Ida's arm and flipped him out of bounds. After the third round, the finalists were Midoriya and Bakugo. Midoriya had expected Bakugo to advance and had studied his battles closely. Bakugo's style was predictable from all his past fights. Standing on the battlefield across from Bakugo gave Midoriya a rush of satisfaction. He adopted a defensive stance, anticipating that Bakugo would attack first. Bakugo suddenly shouted at Midoriya, demanding an answer and clearly agitated. Midoriya replied that he didn't understand what Bakugo was asking. Bakugo sighed and continued, the tension between them palpable as the match began. Bakugo snapped that Izuku was the same clueless, useless, quirkless disappointment he had always been. He added that it seemed Izuku was not quirkless anymore and that if Izuku had half a brain he would have known that was what Bakugo had been asking about. Izuku did not give Bakugo the satisfaction of a reaction and remained silent. Bakugo declared that it did not even matter, claiming his power would outmatch Izuku's new quirk. He took a stance and sprinted toward Izuku. Izuku easily dodged the attack, grabbed Bakugo from behind, and pinned him to the ground. After listening to the crowd's cheers, Izuku released Bakugo and offered him a hand up, teasing him with a fake smile that Bakugo should have known it would not be that easy. Bakugo smacked Izuku's hand away and rubbed a cut on his cheek while pushing himself to his feet. Izuku suggested Bakugo could use a bit of good sportsmanship, which only seemed to anger Bakugo further. Bakugo sent an explosion at Izuku, who easily evaded it. Izuku admitted to himself that this round would not be fair and accepted that he could not go easy on Bakugo, even if Bakugo needed him to. Bakugo became increasingly explosive and aggravated as Izuku kept landing speedy attacks and dodging Bakugo's retaliations. To Izuku, it began to look pathetic. He could not understand what he had ever seen in Bakugo. For a moment Izuku regretted what he did next, but he recovered quickly. He decided to finish the fight decisively, using all of One for All's power to knock Bakugo out. Izuku had only used maximum power against Todoroki in a previous match because he had expected Todoroki to strike simultaneously, reducing the impact, but against Bakugo he believed the explosion quirk could not withstand his attack. In Izuku's mind, Bakugo had brought it on himself by talking down to him. Izuku ended up standing above the others to receive the first-place medal. All Might handed out the third-place medal to Todoroki and another to Tokoyami. Todoroki's injuries were not severe. He had some sprains but no broken bones. Bakugo could not be awarded a medal because he was unconscious in the infirmary. When All Might presented the first-place medal to Izuku, his public display of pride felt hollow. All Might talked about how proud he was and how he knew great things would come from Izuku, but the expression he put on for the cameras appeared fake. Izuku felt a small satisfaction at the uneasy, uncertain look he managed to elicit from All Might. If anything was certain, it was that All Might now knew Izuku had no intention of giving his power away. It was the morning of Christmas Eve at the Midoriya household. Stockings hung by the fireplace, holiday candles burned, and a warm, festive feeling filled the air. Inko came into the kitchen to retrieve a few decorations from a box on the counter and found Izuku sitting at the kitchen table, unmoving since he had come downstairs. He rested his head in his hand and wore a soft smile. Inko observed that the mood Izuku had been in lately could not be explained by the sports festival alone and suggested that something else was on his mind. Izuku flustered in response when she pressed, and Inko pointed out that since he had come home for winter break he had been smiling and daydreaming more than usual, and even asked if the stars looked brighter. Inko guessed that he was in love. A doorbell rang. Izuku rushed to answer it to avoid his mother's questions. He was not ready to talk about his relationship. When he opened the door, he found his friends Toga, Yozora, and Dabi standing there. Izuku was dressed casually. Earlier that day, as they walked through a quiet neighborhood, Dabi had questioned Toga about why they were doing this. Toga had insisted that they should surprise Izuku for Christmas because it would be fun. Dabi worried it was rude to show up uninvited and that anything could go wrong since Izuku was not expecting company. Yozora agreed that the plan might be risky. Toga dismissed their concerns, reminding them that Dabi was Izuku's partner and that Izuku would be happy to spend time with them. Dabi sighed, knowing Toga would get her way. When Toga stopped in front of a small, familiar house, she exclaimed that they had arrived. All three recognized the house from the day they had first met Izuku and walked him home. They walked up to the door and rang the bell. It was not long before someone came to get the door for them. When the door opened, none of the visitors knew what to say. As Yozora had predicted, Izuku had not expected company, judging by the outfit he wore: a light pink cropped hoodie, light pink short shorts, and black thigh-high socks. Inko asked if someone was at the door, and Izuku answered that a few of his friends had come by. Inko welcomed them in and led them to the living room. Dabi politely remarked that she had a beautiful home, and Inko thanked him, saying she did not believe she had met any of them before. Toga introduced herself as Toga Himiko, Yozora identified herself as Yozora Moriya, and Dabi gave his name. Inko wondered why Izuku had not told her about these new friends and asked how they had met and whether they went to school together. Dabi explained that they were technically third years who had dropped out of school and were interested in becoming heroes. They had met Izuku while watching him train in the park and had started training together afterward. Izuku added that if it had not been for their help with training, he might never have won the sports festival and that they had taught him to control his quirk so he no longer hurt himself every time he used it. Impressed, Inko admitted she had always worried about Izuku injuring himself and said he was lucky to have them. When she asked where they trained, Dabi said the place where the three of them lived had once been owned by a hero and still had a large training room. Izuku stayed there when sessions ran late. Not wanting to be in the way, Izuku began to excuse himself to get some things done around the house, and Inko suggested that he take his friends up to his room. Izuku nodded and led the way upstairs. A wooden sign hung on Izuku's bedroom door. Reading Izuku in fancy letters, decorated with painted flowers and pink and green glitter. The sign had been a gift from his mother before his 4th birthday because she had known he liked feminine things. His father had objected strongly at the time, and Inko had pretended to throw the sign away after a heated argument, but she had actually had Izuku hide it. About a year after his father left, Izuku had put the sign back up and had not taken it down since. With some hesitation, Izuku opened his bedroom door and revealed a room that the three teens had not expected: pink everywhere. There was a bed with white and pink bedding, a white vanity with a pink stool, a gaming setup with a pink gaming chair, a light-up full-length mirror, a walk-in closet, and a bathroom. Toga excitedly rushed past Izuku, Dabi, and Yozora to look around and declared that it was the cutest room she had ever seen and that he was lucky. Izuku blushed and kept his eyes on the floor, feeling awkward that such a private side of himself had been discovered by Toga, Yozora, and Dabi. When someone gently took his hand, he looked up and met Dabi's caring gaze. Dabi's expression conveyed that Izuku did not have to be embarrassed, that he could relax around them, and that they accepted him no matter what. Dabi squeezed Izuku's hand reassuringly and gave him a brief, affectionate hug, then rested his forehead against Izuku's for a moment. Inko, who had seen the brief display of closeness from the hallway, squealed with delight and said she had suspected they were a couple from the moment they had arrived. Izuku stood flustered while Dabi held his hand with a faint smirk. Inko then asked if the three of them had any Christmas plans. Dabi replied that they did not and had only planned a short visit before returning to their place. Inko insisted they spend Christmas with the family and offered accommodations in the living room, saying she had already mentally adopted them and that they could call her Inko, Auntie, or Mom. She left to finish the laundry downstairs without waiting for a response. Dabi chuckled at Inko's enthusiasm. Izuku, embarrassed by the attention, punched Dabi's shoulder lightly to quiet him. Dabi leaned closer and told Izuku that he liked the outfit and that Izuku looked beautiful before walking into the room with his partner following behind him. Toga continued to gush about how wonderful Izuku's wardrobe was. Toga told Izuku she loved it as soon as he came into the room. Izuku noted that and watched Toga and Yozora pose in his clothes in the lit full-length mirror, asking why they were trying on his things. Toga explained that they wanted to make sure the clothes fit because they were going to end up borrowing them. Izuku apologized for the mess and admitted he had not expected company and hadn't made his bed. Toga waved him off and pointed to the clothes strewn by his closet, apologizing for the state of the room. Dabi walked over to the gaming corner and admired the setup. Izuku led him to a large box by the closet and carefully opened it, revealing a brand new pink Razer gaming set. Dabi was amazed and guessed it must have cost a fortune. Izuku explained that he had received it through a sponsorship deal and mentioned that he streamed sometimes. Out of nowhere, Toga suggested they go downstairs to watch cheesy Christmas movies while baking cookies. Izuku and Yozora agreed, and all four of them went to the kitchen. Inko lent them a few of her best recipes. While Dabi and Izuku gathered ingredients, Toga and Yozora picked a movie on the living room TV that was visible from the kitchen. They chose Elf. They spent about an hour baking a variety of cookies, not following the recipes perfectly but still getting great results. While the cookies cooled, they spread blankets and pillows all over the living room and decided sleeping arrangements. Toga on one sofa, Yozora on the other, and Dabi and Izuku on the floor. They settled in comfortably together. When the cookies were cool, they arranged them on a platter and brought them into the living room along with candy and popcorn. The evening passed with pillow forts, rounds of hot chocolate, and playful goofing around while classic Christmas movies played in the background. When it got late, they said goodnight and fell asleep by the Christmas tree. Sunlight woke Izuku the next morning. He opened his eyes to find Dabi beside him and nudged him awake. Dabi said it was Christmas. Izuku roused Yozora and Toga and they all sat around the tree to exchange presents. Toga and Dabi gave each other thoughtful, practical gifts. Dabi gave Toga a set of nice knives, and Toga gave Dabi a collection of lower face masks with varied designs for missions. The most meaningful exchange was between Izuku and Dabi. Izuku had made a homemade scrapbook for Dabi, mostly decorated in green, pink, and blue, with patches, ribbons, and stickers of bunnies and puppies. The book already contained pictures of them together, moments from the carnival, other outings, and a photo taken after the sports festival when Dabi, Toga, and Yozora had celebrated Izuku's win, along with plenty of blank space to add future memories. Dabi was genuinely moved by the craftsmanship and thoughtfulness of the gift. After thanking Izuku for the scrapbook, Dabi handed Izuku a small wrapped box. Inside was a simple gold ring with an engraving on the inside that read "My Bunny." Izuku's eyes lit up, and he smiled warmly, clearly touched by the gesture. Dabi then retrieved another, larger gift from under the tree. Izuku untied the ribbon and lifted the lid to reveal a small white baby bunny. They were both thrilled by the surprise and quiet joy of the moment. Later, in another playful scene, Izuku pretended to be on the run, taking cover behind the sofa with a Nerf gun and dramatically declaring that he would never be caught. Dabi emerged from his hiding spot in the curtains, taunting him, and Izuku tried to run until Yozora stepped in front of the couch. Dabi observed that Izuku was cornered and that there was no way out. Yozora told him that he should have thought this through as she and Dabi raised their Nerf guns. Izuku raised a brow and asked the two supposed enemy agents if they had noticed someone was missing. Dabi and Yozora's faces tightened with nervousness as they realized the predicament. Izuku signaled for Toga to act. Toga stepped out from around the corner where she had been waiting for the perfect moment, wearing tinted sunglasses and wielding two large motorized Nerf blasters. The sudden appearance and heavy firepower caused an audible wave of alarm to cross the other team's faces. Toga fired enthusiastically while Dabi and Yozora scrambled for cover and failed comically. Dabi theatrically collapsed, pretending a dart had struck his heart, and Yozora did the same. Toga and Izuku moved to where their pretend victims lay and, in a playful display of triumph, Toga stepped a foot near Dabi while she and Izuku pumped their fists and declared victory over the last treats. Inko leaned against the doorway, confused, and asked if they had really been fighting all of that just to decide who would get the last 2 Oreos. Izuku confirmed that they had, and Inko suggested rock paper scissors as a simpler alternative. Izuku dismissed the idea as too boring, insisting their method had been the only way. Inko then said she was heading to the store and asked if anyone needed anything besides Oreos. Dabi responded that they would be fine, and when Inko gave him a questioning look he quickly corrected himself and used her first name. Toga cheerfully thanked Inko. She had already made herself at home. After Inko left, the 4 teens moved into the kitchen. Toga and Izuku ate the last Oreos with exaggerated smugness. Izuku went back to the living room to get his pet rabbit, which he had named Yuki, and brought the rabbit to the center of the table so everyone could admire her. Toga gushed that the rabbit was adorable, and Izuku beamed with pride, calling the rabbit his little angel. Izuku's phone buzzed and he checked the Class 1A group chat, which was very active. The chat was full of classmates planning a New Year's Eve gathering. Kaminari had started the idea, and many classmates Ashido, Yururika, Jairu, Mina, Siro, Hagakure, Kirishima and others responded with enthusiasm. They had agreed on a new ice skating rink by the mall as the meeting place. Todoroki would not be joining because his father would not permit it. Izuku had not replied yet. Dabi asked whose phone it was, and Izuku explained that it was his class chat. He told them he had already said he had other plans and that he would much rather spend the night with the people in the room. Yururika and Mina had reacted in the chat with disappointment that he did not join them often anymore, and Izuku rolled his eyes at their sudden concern, noting that it probably stemmed from his recent win at the sports festival. Yuzora reassured him that he did not need to worry about the class and that they would have plenty of fun together. Kaminari suggested that Izuku could bring his other friends so everyone could hang out. Izuku showed his phone to Dabi, Toga, and Yuzora. Toga argued that he should go because the classmates would likely keep asking if he declined and because the group in the room would also be there to keep him company. After a moment of thought, Izuku sighed and agreed to go, warning that it better not be a waste of time. He told his class in the chat that they would be there. The party was set to start at 8 p.m., with a rented party room at the rink reserved from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. With a few hours before the gathering, Izuku, Dabi, and Yuki watched a cartoon together in the living room while Toga and Yuzora rummaged through Izuku's closet for something to wear. At 6:20 p.m., Izuku went to his room to change into an outfit he felt would help him blend in more: blue jeans, a dark gray shirt tucked in, and black boots. Before he left, he placed Yuki in her cage for safety and left a note for Inko asking her to let the rabbit out when she returned from the store so the rabbit would have plenty of time to be out. Dabi dressed in black ripped jeans, a white shirt, a black hoodie, a mask over the lower face, and black boots. Toga chose a black fitted top with a sheer white overshirt tucked into a short skirt and tall laced boots. Yuzora wore a black crop top, black ripped jeans, textured tights, and platform boots. By 8:15 p.m., almost everyone had arrived at the rink. Yururika hurried to the benches where the rest of Class 1A sat and apologized for being late. Kaminari assured her it was fine and that they were just waiting for Izuku. Once he arrived, the group prepared to start skating and Yurarika agreed enthusiastically. A couple of minutes later, Midoriya joined them and Kirishima greeted him warmly, apologizing for his slight lateness. Kaminari pointed out a booth near the entrance where they could rent ice skates and mentioned that Midoriya was their final guest. Gyro asked if Kaminari had planned to bring more friends, and Kaminari said that some of them were probably still nearby and that he had brought one additional person. Mineta asked if those friends were the same ones from the mall, and Kaminari confirmed that they were. Toga approached Midoriya and greeted him with a quick, energetic hug, mentioning that she remembered many of them. Mineta tried to form a sentence in response but trailed off, and Kaminari waved to Toga and returned the greeting. Toga responded friendly and the exchange left the others looking a bit flustered. Dabi and Yuzora then joined the group. Yuzora stood with Toga to greet everyone, attracting as much attention from the boys as Toga did. The group noticed Dabi as he introduced himself without mentioning his relationship with Midoriya, since Midoriya had not told his classmates. Kaminari and Siro shifted nervously. They had met Dabi a few weeks before and had an awkward incident then. Dabi chose to act as if he did not remember them to keep things simple. While the others were distracted by Dabi, Yurarika pulled Yuzora and Toga aside to ask a private question about whether either of them were dating Midoriya. Yuzora answered no, and Uraraka said that was good, adding that Midoriya was off limits to them because it would not be fair. Toga and Yozora found the reasoning confusing, and Uraraka explained that she thought Midoriya needed someone who would also be on a path to be a great hero with him at UA. Toga snapped back that Midoriya needed someone who had always been there for him, someone he could trust and who loved and respected him. Yozora and Toga could tell that Uraraka's argument had a different tone than she intended, and they turned away. Before walking off, Yozora stated plainly that they could have gotten into UA but chose not to, and that they would not want to attend school with someone like Uraraka every day. Then Yozora and Toga left and rejoined Midoriya and Dabi. Midoriya asked where they had been and they pointed to the spot where Uraraka had spoken to them. Midoriya suggested they rent skates since most of the group already had. Once everyone had their skates on, they went out onto the rink. For many of the class it was their first time skating, but they did fairly well. Midoriya, however, struggled at first and kept falling. Toga and Yozora tried to help him as best they could, but there was only so much they could do. While Midoriya was repeatedly getting back up, he noticed everyone watching someone else glide across the ice. It was Dabi, moving with graceful, practiced skill that looked almost professional. Dabi skated over to Midoriya, helped him to his feet, and held his hands as they skated backward toward the center of the rink. Midoriya admired Dabi's technique, and Dabi chuckled softly in response. Dabi offered to give Midoriya some tips on staying steady, and he spent time coaching him on basic posture and balance. Midoriya fell several times at first, but Dabi kept helping him up and stayed by his side the whole time. They enjoyed practicing together, and by the time the group decided to head to the party room at 10 o'clock, Midoriya had improved dramatically and skated with confidence, having picked up the basics much faster than anyone had expected. Kirishima complimented Dabi and Midoriya on their skating as they walked to the party room, and Mina added that they had been impressive. Dabi replied modestly that he was still a beginner and that it had been his first time. Some classmates mentioned that Dabi had drawn attention at the sports festival and that people had asked for his autograph. Mineta muttered that it felt unfair that Midoriya had a strong quirk, learned quickly, and seemed popular and well-liked. Kaminari then excitedly asked if everyone was ready to party as the group entered the party room. There were multicolored lights that could be controlled with a remote and huge speakers to play music. Everyone chipped in to order a bunch of pizzas, and a few students brought drinks, desserts, and chips to the party for the group. The karaoke machine was used by a few students who were mostly in it for the fun rather than the singing, and everyone ended up having a great time. At 11:30, when the group decided to go outside to watch the fireworks, Izuku was lagging behind and felt someone grab his arm to stop him. He turned and saw Dabi. Dabi hushed him and made it clear that they were taking a little detour. Izuku trusted his boyfriend completely, so he let Dabi take his hand and lead him away from the rest of the group. They walked to the end of a long hallway and found a door that led up a few flights of stairs to another door. Dabi tried the doorknob and realized it was locked. He muttered a short curse under his breath. Izuku asked in concern if they should head back. Dabi reached into his back pocket and pulled out his phone. He removed the phone case to reveal a long metal tool and used it to work the lock until the door opened. Dabi explained that he always kept that tool in his phone case because it could be useful as a lock pick, a small screwdriver, or to feel safer in certain situations. He then walked through the door with Izuku following behind. They stepped out onto the roof of the building. Dabi walked to the ledge, sat down, and patted the spot next to him to invite Izuku to sit. Izuku hesitated but then joined him. Dabi asked Izuku what was wrong after seeing his defeated expression. Izuku admitted that he did not know how he should feel. On one hand, the night sky looked beautiful and he could admire the stars forever, but on the other hand, this was the first time he had been on a rooftop since a very dark time in his life. Dabi gently took Izuku's hand and ran his fingers across the ring on Izuku's hand. Dabi asked if Izuku knew the meaning of the ring, and Izuku answered that he had been told it was a promise ring. Dabi explained that the ring meant he promised to always be there for Izuku, just as he had been the last time Izuku was on a rooftop the day they met. Dabi said he was so glad they had met and promised to always care for Izuku, value him, and be by his side no matter what. Izuku returned the promise and said he would do the same. Dabi sighed, and then, when Izuku asked earlier how he had learned to skate so well, Dabi told the story of his past. He explained that when he was younger he had spent a lot of time with his youngest brother. Their father had been harsh, especially toward the youngest, treating him as some ideal rather than as a son. Dabi described their father as volatile and cruel, a man whose temper burned like fire. Because of that, Dabi and his siblings had gravitated toward ice as a kind of refuge. Their father had tried to make the youngest brother feel ashamed of what made him different, but Dabi refused to accept that. Noticing Izuku looked cold, Dabi took off his sweatshirt and handed it to him. Izuku accepted it and told Dabi to continue. Dabi remembered sneaking into his brother's room one night and coaxing him out to go to an ice rink nearby. Neither of them knew what they were doing, but they had fun skating together. The sneaking out continued for years without their father finding out, and those nights had made Dabi feel glad he could be there for his brother. They stared up at the stars together while Dabi recounted those memories. Dabi said that the party was bringing back difficult memories for both of them. This was Izuku's first time on a roof since his suicide attempt, and it was Dabi's first time at a rink since he had left the person he once swore to protect. As his voice trailed off, Izuku saw tears on Dabi's cheeks and gently wiped them away with the sleeve of his hoodie. Izuku asked Dabi to look at him. Their eyes met, and Izuku saw in Dabi's icy blue eyes the same sorrow, guilt, and bottled-up emotions he felt in his own green eyes. They cried together, sharing a quiet moment of mutual understanding and support. Izuku and Dabi felt a deep sympathy and commitment to one another. They held a quiet, steadfast love that made them promise to stay and protect each other, to keep each other in mind, and to find comfort in one another's presence. They smiled faintly at the thought of how much the other meant to them and how often they each thought of the other throughout the day. Everything reminded them of the other, and their mood could be brightened just by hearing that person's name. The simple reminder that the other existed and that they could call that person their boyfriend was enough to lift their spirits. They counted down together as the decorations. Izuku replied that he did and asked what had motivated them to do it. Yozora explained that earlier Kurojairi had seen Izuku's dorm room while bringing him to class and mentioned it looked bare since all of the All Might items were gone. Yozora added that decorating Izuku's dorm had been Dabi's idea and that they had even brought a few things from Izuku's home to make the space feel more like his own. Izuku looked toward the bed and noticed Dabi blushing at being acknowledged, which Izuku found endearing. He thanked them, overwhelmed by how thoughtful it all was. Yozora said it had just felt like the right thing to do. A silence fell as the three of them exchanged looks. Izuku asked if there was something they wanted to ask. After a few more glances, Yozora finally explained that Shigaraki had called them about an hour earlier and they needed a favor that might be a bit out of Izuku's comfort zone. Toga told Izuku that they needed him to come to a party with them. Izuku hesitated but said that he guessed that would be fine. Toga clarified that it was a high school party at a school a few blocks from UA. Yozora added that a junior at that school, whose parents were out of town, was throwing a house party for the day they were there. Izuku pointed out that Valentine's Day was the next day, and Yozora suggested the junior might have plans for tomorrow. Regardless, the party was expected to be large. Yozora then explained that the real reason they wanted Izuku to go was to gather information. Yozora emphasized that they were not asking him to work against heroes, they needed intelligence on another villain group that was putting them in danger. The leader of that rival group and a few members attended that high school and were popular there. Yozora said they intended to stay undetected, ask other students a few questions, and hopefully gather enough information to neutralize the threat before it reached them. Izuku asked why they needed his help. Dabi said they wanted him for backup in case things got heated and reached for Yuki, petting her in his lap. Izuku considered the request carefully. Though he could think of reasons not to go, he thought of many more reasons why he should. They had always been there for him, had helped him train, given him a room at the hideout, and redecorated his dorm. Those favors and more led him to a decision. Izuku agreed to go. They left Izuku's dorm and stopped by his house so he could grab a few things he needed for school. Yuki came along because Izuku didn't want her to be alone. After going inside, they went up to Izuku's room. Izuku paused and mentioned that his mother wasn't home, and Dabi asked whether she usually worked during the day. Izuku confirmed she left for work early each morning. Izuku also noted that Kurogiri had said he would be busy that day. Izuku then demanded to know how the three of them had gotten into his house while he had been at school. One of them offered to help him find the textbook he was looking for. Toga noticed and excitedly pointed out the animal pictures on the back of Izuku's closet door, calling them cute. Izuku admitted he was an animal lover and that the pictures represented his dream pets. Toga commented on his interesting taste and asked whether he truly wanted a pet duck. Izuku laughed and listed several animals he would like as pets: a monkey, a ferret, a pig, a tarantula, a fox, a turtle, a chameleon, and possibly a dog or cat. Dabi then moved the conversation back to the night's plans and reminded Izuku that there would likely be drags and alcohol at a party like this. Dabi warned Izuku to stay completely away from such things all night. Dabi instructed Toga, Yozora, and Izuku on their roles and reminded them that someone should stay with Izuku at all times if they needed to split up. Toga, Yozora, and Izuku all agreed to the plan. Though Izuku found it difficult to process everything, he trusted his friends to look out for him. He changed out of his uniform and put on casual clothes, hoping to blend in with the crowd. Izuku suddenly cried out and jumped back when he spotted something small on the wall. Dabi hurried over and asked what was wrong. Izuku pointed to a tiny spider, and Dabi pointed out that the spider was smaller than a fingernail, teasing him about his earlier comment about wanting a tarantula. Izuku begged Dabi to get it away from him. Once that was handled and everyone was ready, they headed to the party together. Izuku found the party overwhelming amid flashing lights and loud music. Dabi gently took Izuku's hand and led him to a quieter room, noticing his anxiety and wanting to make sure he felt comfortable. Dabi told Izuku to stay with Toga and Yozora for a moment while he went to meet someone. Izuku agreed. When Dabi left, Izuku realized Toga and Yozora were gone. He looked around the calmer room and, growing increasingly anxious, tried to steady his breathing. He reminded himself to stay put until someone returned and then reached for his back pocket to get his phone, only to find it missing. He checked his pockets and around his waist, feeling awkward as he searched, but his phone was not there. Izuku remembered asking Dabi to hold his phone earlier while he tied his shoes and hoped Dabi still had it. Before he could decide what to do next, a tall, messy-haired boy approached and called him over. The boy introduced himself as Taro and, recognizing Izuku as the UA Sports Festival winner, began praising him and offering a drink from a communal bowl. A girl nearby scolded Taro for invading Izuku's space and tried to steer him away, apologizing for the interruption. Taro persisted, insisting Izuku deserved a drink, and handed him a red plastic cup. Izuku hesitated because he did not usually drink, but he felt flattered by the attention and accepted the cup. He tasted the punch and found it stronger than he expected. The girl asked if Izuku had plans for the night and suggested leaving the party to get better drinks elsewhere. Before the conversation could go further, Toga and Yozora appeared behind Izuku and pulled him away from the group. Toga chided him about almost being tricked, and Izuku admitted he had seen what was happening with a small, confident smile. Izuku then asked his friends if they knew where Dabi was. Someone said that he really had to do something. Yozora asked if he had left Izuku alone. The other friend explained that he had expected them to look after Izuku, but they had already run off without noticing, so it was their fault. Yozora apologized and said that he should be upstairs in a room at the end of the hallway and reminded them of the #1 rule of house parties: never open a closed door or else you might see something disturbing. Izuku acknowledged it even if he did not fully understand. He kept the warning in mind. Izuku went upstairs and found Dabi sitting alone in a room. Something happened there that made Izuku extremely uncomfortable, and he fled the room. Downstairs, Yozora and Toga stood by the doorway calling for him, but Izuku kept going. He could not stay, he had to get away. Just as he reached the door, Toga reached for his arm. Startled by any touch after what had just occurred, Izuku instinctively jerked away and smacked her hand off. Toga cried out in surprise, but when she saw his expression she fell silent. Both she and Yozora watched as tears streamed down Izuku's cheeks. He bit his lip to hold back sobs. Yozora moved closer and offered to go get Dabi, but Izuku, choking on hiccups and tears, begged them not to. He could not look at Dabi right then. Without waiting for a response, Izuku turned and ran. He did not look back. It was dark and a light drizzle had started, but he kept running toward home. He refused to stop, only allowing himself brief slowdowns now and then. When he reached his house, he realized he had left his keys with plans to return to the dorms earlier, and reluctantly rang the doorbell. After a short wait, his mother, Inko, opened the door and exclaimed at how late and soaked he was. Izuku gave a forced smile and told her he had been out for a jog to enjoy the cool night air and that rain had started to pick up, which was why he had come home instead of returning to the dorms. The rain offered the convenient excuse for his tear-streaked face. Inko ushered him inside and told him to take a hot shower and change into something comfortable while she put his wet clothes in the wash and made tea. Izuku nodded, took off his shoes, and hurried upstairs. He stripped his clothes and stood under the hot water, letting it run over his back. The water felt lukewarm against the numbness inside him. Thoughts and emotions that had been overwhelming earlier faded into a blank, leaving him feeling empty and quiet. He simply stood there, looking down at his feet as the water ran. After a while he turned off the shower, dried himself, and put on black sweatpants and a white shirt. He hesitated at his closet, reaching for an oversized black hoodie but pulling his hand away. Not that one. Anything but that one. He chose an old dark green hoodie instead and went downstairs. In the kitchen, Inko sat reading a magazine with a cup of tea and a tray of his favorite treats set out. She greeted him warmly and had prepared a cup of tea for him. Izuku greeted his mother with a small wave as he sat down at the kitchen table across from her. Inko asked what was wrong. He was surprised she could tell before realizing he had forgotten to soften his stone-cold expression. Izuku muttered that nothing was wrong. Inko pressed, saying he did not look all right. Izuku raised his voice to state that he was fine. His tone became stern and monotone, making him impossible to read. Inko noted that it was late and that she was going upstairs to bed. She could tell he preferred to be left alone, so she stood, put her mug in the sink, and kissed the top of his head while reminding him to get to bed soon. Izuku barely nodded in response. He left his tea untouched, letting it go cold. He ate about half of the snacks and then idly toyed with the rest, sliding them along the tray and breaking them into pieces. He tossed the remains in the trash, emptied his tea into the sink, and went upstairs. Lying under his covers, staring blankly at the wall across from him, the emotions finally broke through. He curled up and cried for hours. Each time the tears stopped and he tried to sleep, the memories resurfaced and left him a sobbing mess. His phone kept receiving messages and calls from Dabi, so he left it in the bathroom for the night. He had texted Toga and Yozora earlier to say he would talk to them tomorrow, and they respected his wish for space. All Izuku wanted was some sleep after everything that had happened. Inko walked through the upstairs hallway carrying a basket of fresh laundry to put away. She stopped outside Izuku's bedroom and peeked in to make sure he was all right. She worried to see that he was still asleep at 1 p.m. She guessed he had not fallen asleep until very late the night before and did not realize he had stayed up until 4 in the morning, even though he had gone to bed around midnight. All night after finally falling asleep, Izuku had been trapped in a cycle of waking from nightmares in a cold sweat, trembling and crying while hugging his knees, staring at the wall to calm himself, and then drifting back to sleep only for the pattern to repeat. At the moment he had been asleep for a couple of hours, and since he had nothing that interested him that day, he did not plan to wake up soon. Around 4 o'clock Inko checked on him again. Izuku sat up with the small rabbit Yuki curled against him when he noticed his mother enter the room. Inko asked how long he had been awake, and Izuku answered that he thought it was about an hour. Inko asked whether he had eaten anything. He had not. When Inko asked if he had been on his phone, Izuku shook his head. She came to sit on the side of his bed, feeling that something was wrong. Inko remarked that the rain had picked up early that morning and that the gloomy weather could make anyone feel worse. Izuku did not respond. He knew he would feel miserable regardless of the weather. Inko suggested he come downstairs so she could make him breakfast, and Izuku agreed that he would be down in a few minutes. When he reached for Yuki, Inko took the rabbit and said she would go feed her, partly knowing that taking Yuki would get Izuku moving. After a short while, Izuku crawled out of bed, changed into sweatpants and socks but kept the same t-shirt and worn hoodie from the night before, and went downstairs. He sat at the kitchen table while Inko prepared his plate and brought it over. He muttered a quiet thanks when she set the food down. Inko sat across from him and sighed. Izuku began to eat but paused after a few bites when he felt his mother's concerned gaze on him. Izuku asked if something was wrong, and Inko told him that he could tell her. He insisted he was fine. Inko reminded him that she had given him all of the previous night and that afternoon to talk and that she was worried. When he continued to deny anything was wrong, Inko suggested the problem involved Dabi. Izuku asked how she had known. Inko explained that his choice of clothes, including not wearing the black hoodie he often borrowed from his boyfriend, and the fact that his phone had been full of missed calls and notifications suggested something was off. She mentioned seeing about 15 missed calls and his phone being on Do Not Disturb when she had gone to put out fresh towels. Izuku asked if she had read any of the messages, and Inko said she had not. Izuku admitted he had not either. When Inko pressed for what had happened, Izuku faltered and then said that something had happened between him and Dabi, but he could not bring himself to give details. Inko's expression darkened with concern. Izuku quickly added that he did not want his mother to be angry with Dabi, that Dabi had been drunk and might have been drugged, and that Dabi had been calling and texting to check that Izuku was okay. Izuku also said he had not told Dabi everything that had led up to the incident. Inko sighed and decided to soothe her son before anything else. She wrapped her arms around him and held him close. Izuku's tears began to fall as he finally let go. Inko comforted him, telling him she was there and that whatever he decided to do she would support him. She also promised she would make sure Dabi understood how much he had hurt Izuku once they were ready to address it. When Inko asked why Dabi had been drunk, Izuku awkwardly changed the subject and complimented the breakfast to deflect. Izuku thanked his mother for making breakfast. Inko sighed as she placed a hand on her son's shoulder and said that she wanted him to have a fun high school experience, though she remembered breaking rules at his age and had learned that danger was not worth it. She told him she did not want him to do anything that would put himself or others in danger, then placed a light kiss on his forehead and told him she just wanted him to be safe. Izuku nodded and gave her a small, genuine smile. Later, the doorbell rang. Inko went to the door and opened it with a welcoming smile that immediately hardened when she saw who stood there, soaked from the rain. Dabi greeted her haltingly. Inko corrected him, insisting he call her Ms. Midoriya, and kept him standing in the downpour. Dabi apologized and looked down at his feet. He asked to speak to Izuku in person because he could not reach him by phone. Inko challenged him, asking if he really thought it would be that easy and saying she wanted to see a big gesture. Dabi pointed out how drenched he already was, and Inko suggested, half teasing, that he perform one of those cliched romantic gestures by tapping on Izuku's window with rocks. She closed the door on him, then reopened it more gently a moment later and told him she was rooting for him. She warned that if he was merely drunk it would be a different matter, and that she would make him face consequences if he hurt Izuku again, but she softened the tone and told him he could call her Inko. Dabi thanked her, visibly relieved. He walked around to the back of the house, hopped the fence, and located Izuku's window using the curtains he remembered. He found a few rounded pebbles that wouldn't break glass and took a spot where Izuku could see him. The whole plan felt ridiculous to him, but he would do anything to make Izuku happy. Izuku was sprawled on his bed listening to music when he heard a tapping sound. He removed one headphone and sat up to listen. The tapping continued, and he went to the window to investigate. A pebble struck the glass, and he looked down to find Dabi standing on the lawn, dripping from the rain. Izuku gave a confused look at the unexpected sight. Dabi gestured toward his phone to show he wanted to communicate by text. Izuku picked up his phone and watched the messages. Dabi messaged that Inko would not let him inside. He had used a playful nickname for Izuku that Izuku found a little embarrassing but not serious. Izuku replied that Inko was right to protect him. Dabi typed an apology and insisted he would never try to hurt Izuku on purpose. Izuku asked what he planned to do about it. Dabi said he wanted to make things right in person and asked if Izuku would go on a date with him that night. Izuku looked at Dabi and saw how sorry he appeared. With pleading eyes, Izuku couldn't help but put his trust in Dabi. Dabi had looked like a sad little pup, and Izuku had answered him with quiet agreement. Dabi told Izuku that he would be back in about 30 minutes after showering and changing out of his wet clothes, and that he wanted to take Izuku somewhere special, so Izuku might want to change. Izuku said he would meet Dabi whenever he was ready. Before leaving, Dabi told Izuku that he loved him. Dabi returned to Izuku's house half an hour later in a fresh set of clothes. A black turtleneck tucked into jeans with a black belt and a jacket for the rain. Inko complimented him on his appearance as she invited him into the kitchen and mentioned that Izuku always took forever to get ready. Dabi asked if Izuku was almost ready, and Inko laughed, saying that knowing Izuku, it would still take a while. She hummed and avoided eye contact as she spoke. They waited, and when Izuku finally descended the stairs, Dabi felt none of the impatience he had expected. Instead, his breath hitched at how breathtaking Izuku looked. Earlier, after Dabi had waved goodbye at the window, Izuku had flopped onto his bed with a sigh. He felt relieved that they had sorted things out in person, but the relief lasted only seconds before he remembered he needed to get ready. He hurried through a shower and took extra time for grooming and a face mask, treating his routine as a way to calm his nerves. He chose a light, sweet-smelling perfume and styled his hair until it felt right. Picking an outfit took the longest. Izuku's closet was a mess by the time he settled on something. He rejected a green crop top because it felt wrong for Valentine's Day and instead put together an ensemble of pinks and whites, a pink cropped long sleeve with cutouts at the shoulders, a white skirt embroidered with pink hearts, a leather pink heart ring choker, and light pink wedges with sheer ribbon bows. He sat at his vanity and applied a subtle, natural makeup look to hide the traces of sleeplessness and lift his confidence. A brightening primer, light BB cream, concealer for dark circles, a touch of blush, a bit of deeper shadow for the eyes, and a little mascara. It was simple, but it helped him feel prepared. He told himself to stop overthinking. Memories of a soaked Dabi in the rain kept drifting through his mind, but he pushed them aside and focused on calming his nerves. He hyped himself up in the mirror, wondering why he felt so anxious when it was only Dabi. After all, they had grown close and comforted each other. He finally went downstairs when he felt ready. At the door, Dabi's mother introduced herself. Rei said she was Dabi's mother and greeted Izuku warmly, giggling at his nervousness and noting that meeting a partner's parent could be a big moment. Rei observed that Dabi probably had not told Izuku as much about her as she had about him, and she offered to take the chance to tell Izuku a bit about herself. Rei asked if he would be interested. Izuku's eyes lit up. He cared for Dabi deeply, and the chance to get to know Dabi's mother as well felt wonderful. From the moment he had seen her, he had thought she seemed kind, and he looked forward to meeting her. Izuku felt certain he would form a bond with her quickly, just as he had when he first met Dabi. Izuku said that he would love to hear about her. Rei smiled and wondered where to begin. He asked about her hobbies and interests, her favorite color, and where she would dream of vacationing. The conversation flowed naturally. Each new question led seamlessly into the next rather than feeling like a string of disconnected prompts. Rei liked painting and writing poems, her favorite color was blue like Dabi's, and she dreamed of a quiet vacation in a small cottage in the snowy mountains. She mentioned that her husband had promised a getaway like that someday, but it never happened. The tone of the conversation shifted toward more serious matters. Rei explained that her relationship with her husband had been rocky. At first he had been kind, but after their first child the affection faded. He broke many promises, was often absent unless necessary, and had become aggressive. Rei said that the day she was admitted to a psychiatric facility was when she realized the love they once had was truly gone. Rei noticed tears forming in Izuku's eyes and apologized for making him sad. Izuku assured her that he was okay but hesitated, looking down at his hands. Dabi watched with a sympathetic expression and asked gently if he was all right. Izuku admitted that he had never met anyone else who had experienced similar things. He still remembered the expression that had been on his mother's face when he was young. He said his father had not been a good presence either and had made their lives miserable. Izuku told them that he had spent much of his life feeling responsible for his father leaving. He believed, as a child, that if he had developed a quirk sooner or behaved differently, his father might have stayed. He said he had missed him. Dabi watched as tears rolled down Izuku's face. Izuku began to hiccup and his breathing became heavy. Dabi stayed quiet and patient until Izuku composed himself and continued. Izuku reflected that, in time, He realized he had no reason to blame himself. His father's departure had been, painful as it was, a kind of release. His mother had weathered years of debt and worry, and there had been times when they might have lost their home. He had watched her work tirelessly, attending interviews and struggling to keep them afloat. She had been persuaded by his father to give up college, where they had met, and had been pressured into thinking she belonged at home. Only after his father left did she see that he had intended to keep them dependent. Eventually things improved. Izuku said he had learned to be more independent while his mother completed a degree online and found a stable job that paid well enough for the two of them. He expressed deep gratitude for her. His mother meant more to him than anyone. Unlike his father, she had always supported his choices. Dabi rose from his chair and embraced Izuku. Izuku stood as well so they could be comfortable. After they parted, Izuku motioned for Rei to come closer. Though surprised, Rei rose and stepped toward him. Izuku drew her into a hug. She relaxed into the gesture. Rei told him that she would always be there for him, that he could think of her as a second mother and call her mom if he wished. Izuku met her gaze and thanked her. He silently vowed to be there for her too. She had Dabi, but he wanted to ensure she had more support. Rei glanced between Dabi and Izuku noticed that Dabi already seemed to understand what she was hinting at. Curious, Izuku asked what she meant. Rei reminded him that Dabi had said he would finally tell him something today. Dabi admitted that he had intended to reveal it but was unsure how. They all settled back into their seats. Dabi confessed that he did not know how to say it and worried about what it might mean for Izuku. He pointed out that Izuku had already been hurt by one disappointing hero, and he hesitated to cause another heartbreak. Izuku pressed him to speak, though he tried to lighten the mood with a small laugh. Dabi revealed that his father was Endeavor. Izuku felt stunned. Learning this felt like another wound, first the betrayal involving All Might, and now this. He wondered if all heroes were the same, even though he still wanted to become one. He was baffled that he had only just learned it. He had kept notebooks as a child filled with details about almost every hero. He had thought he knew everything about the number 2 hero. Apparently he did not. Rei acknowledged that Izuku must have many questions. Dabi could not answer every question right away, but he decided to reveal what he was ready to expose. His father had always been abusive. The main reason his father had stayed with his mother, Dabi believed, was an attempt to create a masterpiece, a child with a dual quirk. Dabi was that first attempt and it had failed. His father had pushed Dabi aside along with the next 2 children. Dabi had still been trained to be a hero, but the training had never seemed like his father's true intention. He had felt his father's anger directed at him, as if he were a useless disappointment with no worth and, worse, something to be punished for sport. Dabi explained that his father was the reason he bore the burns. He did not know whether those marks were the result of his father's quirk or his own, only that they had hurt and that his father had not cared. His voice cracked as he recalled that his father had been willing to let him die, to watch him.